meeting of the Senate Transportation and Senate Environmental Resources and Energy Committee. The chairs are very pleased to have you here today. This is a topic that Senator Yaw and I have had conversations on the past several months. Certainly, the movement of flammable liquids or dangerous liquids via the rails has gathered much public attention only because of the accidents. We know there's a lot more product moved that has moved very safely throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And we know that that's part of the access for the product to market is via our rail system, which we're very proud of here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. But we always recognize that we need to maybe make some changes and adjustments to the law to catch up with the times and the size of the trains and the amount of cars on those trains. So Senator Yaw and I discussed it and decided we were going to do a joint hearing. We appreciate all the testifiers here today and all the attendance here today. As we'll do in our hearings, we're going to try to stick to the time limit. If for some reason someone has a question, you have time to answer it, the information to answer it. If you could get the answers to Senator Yaw's office, my office, Senator Udicek's office, and Senator Wozniak's office, we would appreciate that very much. We'll then disseminate the information to all the committee members. So with that, Senator Gene Yaw, my friend and co-chair here today, I turn the chair over to you, Gene.
Thank you, Senator Rafferty. I just very briefly would like to say that transportation by rail is obviously really important. The United States is blessed with all of the energy possibilities that it has, but we need to get all those products to market. And rail obviously is one way that we get those products to market. And I think in our case here in Pennsylvania, rail is a tremendous benefit to the southeastern part of the state. So that happens to be the area with the most population. So it's something that we are both concerned with, the environment and as well as the being able to do this safely. So we really look forward to having the presenters here today to give us information which we can act on or will help us in making our decisions in the Senate. So thank you very much in advance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman. Senator Udicek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Chairman Rafferty, Chairman Yaw for putting together today's hearing. It is a very important topic. Movement of goods, be it crude oil or be it traditional goods, very important to the economy of Pennsylvania. Railroads are big business for Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania having the most railroads of any other state, railroad companies. My particular concern today that I would like to see addressed by those that will present testimony, I represent all of the urban areas in Luzerne County, all the third-class cities. Many of them have railroads as a neighbor directly in their downtown and high population density areas. We want to make sure that we're moving those goods safely. So it's a very timely meeting. I appreciate both chairmen for putting it together today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. There'll be no action items taken today, so members will be in and out. Senator Wozniak, we know, will be with us shortly. He's a Democrat chair of the Senate Transportation Committee. Senator Bartolotta is with us here today. Thank you, Senator. And Senator Vogel, thank you both very much. And I'll try to announce the other senators as they come in and out so you're aware of who they are. And I know both senators are very keenly interested in this as well. Cam and I have had conversations on this and the movement of the goods through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and we're going to see more because fortunately our economy is doing better in that regard. So we want to make sure that we're doing what's safe for the folks driving the trains, those neighborhoods are going through, and certainly for the environment, as Gene hit on. With that, we'll begin the testimony then, and first to testify will be the Honorable Gladys Brown, Chairwoman of the PUC, and I understand I'm in your chair, Gladys. Gladys certainly is known to many of us from her years in the Senate of Pennsylvania, and Mr. Rodney Bender, Transportation Division Manager, Public Utility Commission. Thank you very much. If you will, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome the Senate here today. I know this is a very unique joint hearing, and I welcome Senator Udicek and Senator Yaw, Senator Bartolotta, and Senator Vogel, and the other members that may be coming today. Welcome you here to the PUC's hearing room. With me today, as you stated, is Rodney Bender, who is our manager for our transportation, which includes our rail safety division under that section. We know that in your invitation to us, you wanted us to testify on the federal perspective related to these issues, these concerns in terms of transportation of cargo and crude oil and other type of chemicals or hazardous materials across Pennsylvania. We certainly would not be able to testify on behalf of the FRA, but we would like to testify today to give you the perspective of Pennsylvania and how we work very closely with the federal government in terms of rail safety. I know I've given you a copy of my full testimony in terms of the time period that we have allotted. I would just like to summarize it and give you some highlights of that testimony. In terms of rail inspection, you know, in the past 45 years since 1970, rail safety has been set nationally in terms of the FRA and the standards that they have provided through their regulations. What that means for Pennsylvania is that we play a very important but supportive role in terms of rail safety. Our staff in our Rail Safety Inspections Group is certified by the FRA, and each inspector specializes in specific railroad disciplines. And those areas in terms of discipline are track, which deals with the physical infrastructure of the railroad, the motive power and equipment, which deals with the locomotive and rail cars that cross our states, the operating practices, which is the human element in terms of railroad activity, including the qualifications of rail crew members and the way they operate and the way they adhere to best safety practices. The fourth element in terms of discipline is the hazardous materials, which is very important to you as well. That deals with the equipment used to transport hazard materials along with safety handling practices and labeling and other related requirements. The fifth discipline is the signal and train control, which deals with the systems used to control the safe passage of trains. In terms of our inspections, we have provided you information that in 2014 alone, we've had 941 inspection reports that are filed with the Federal Railroad Administration. And this year alone, since we are only in June of this year, we have filed 297 inspection reports with the FRA, and they include a breakdown in your material that you have of the 5 disciplines that I just talked about. In addition, we have railroad safety engineering, and that's probably the area that many of you as members of the General Assembly are more familiar with. That, in this group, they oversee the highway railroad crossings throughout Pennsylvania, which include at-grade crossings where public roads cross railroad tracks, bridge crossings where bridges carrying public roads over railroads, bridges carrying railroads over public roads, and bridges carrying railroads over other railroads. So that's the area that most of you are probably familiar with. And this actually is our exclusive jurisdiction under Title 66, under the Public Utility Code, and that's regarding the construction, relocation, suspension, and abolition of public highway railroad crossings. There are approximately 5,600 public at-grade rail crossings along with 3,200 bridge crossings in Pennsylvania. Identifying ways of to address the aging infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, and the safety concerns related to both crossing and bridges is the focus of our Rail Safety Engineering Group. Our engineers are involved in an average of 180 formal proceedings per year involving bridges and railroad crossings, from field meetings to site inspections to formal conferences regarding bridge repair and replacement. Additionally, we promote safety enhanced crossings ranging from projects to upgraded active warning devices such as the lights and grades, to the replacement of at-grade crosses with bridges, such as the recent elimination of the 3 public at-grade crossings at Amtrak's Keystone Line, which is between Harrisburg and Philadelphia. Our rail safety staff has a complement of about 15 staff persons. It's broken down into our Rail Safety Inspection Group and our Rail Safety Engineering. The inspection group has 1 supervisor and has 7 inspectors. Our Rail Safety Engineering Group has 1 supervisor and 6 professional engineers, 2 of which we just brought on staff June 1st of this year. So we were very happy to have them at a full complement. Our interface with the Federal Railroad Administration is one where we actually interact with them almost on a daily basis because we refer to it as a multi-layer system where we are actually doing the inspections on behalf of the Federal Railroad Administration. Our inspectors also attend yearly training conferences hosted by the FRA, and the two agencies have territories that overlap to ensure maximum inspection coverage. The inspection of the railroad track by either the PUC Rail Safety Inspector or the FAA inspector requires the physical presence of appropriate railroad company personnel to accompany them. And that's where you get the multi-layer, because the railroad companies also do inspections as well. So the PUC offers assistance to the FRA in their investigations of derailment, track inspection, record checks, drug and alcohol record checks, and hours of service records. As you know, with the recent derailment in Philadelphia, we contacted the FRA immediately and asked them if they needed our assistance. At that time, they said they did not, but we still sent out one of our inspectors to Philadelphia to provide any assistance that they may need. The concerns that we have, we know that there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of our staff. We do have some concerns, whereas the FRA conducted a survey that showed Pennsylvania to be one of the next to lowest paying state for inspector positions, only with West Virginia paying less. So we have that concern, and with that, we know that many times our inspectors that we bring on staff, because they are trained by the FRA, then look at the opportunities with the federal government and have usually move on with the FRA. So even though right now we have a full complement, we know that we need to increase our levels in terms of the number of inspectors. So we wish to do that, and some of that will come down to funding, and we hope to be able to absorb that in our current budget that we have, hoping that we will receive the full amount that we have presented for our budget this year. In terms of the full complement, I already stated that we have 8 rail safety inspectors, and by comparison to the other states, we actually review 5,600 miles of track. In other states, like New York, they have 13 inspectors, and they cover about 4,800 miles of track. West Virginia has 10 inspectors, and they cover about 2,200 miles of track. And Maryland has 3 inspectors, and they cover about 758 miles of track. Pennsylvania also has the most in terms of number of operating railroad companies of any state, with a total of 57 operating across the state. They range from the largest Class 1 railroads to moving long trains of goods along busy mainline tracks to small short line railroads that may serve a short list of industry in a small area, moving a few cars at a time. In summary, I just want to underscore that we do work closely with the FRA to monitor all the factors that can impact a safe movement of trains across Pennsylvania, including track, motive power and equipment, operating practices, hazardous materials, and grade crossings. When incidents do occur, as I stated before, we are there to provide the assistance to the FRA, along with the National Transportation Safety Board. They actually take the lead role in terms of responding to major accidents, as they did in Philadelphia on May 12th. We have worked to ensure our oversight of oil trains routes, which make up about 700 miles of the 5,600 miles of total rail in Pennsylvania, including our ongoing efforts to bring additional inspectors and engineers into our rail safety section. However, we are sensitive to the issues involving passenger rail, especially the heavily traveled and higher speed runs from Harrisburg to Philadelphia. What we see is that there's no single silver bullet in terms of a solution to this, but we are very interested in working very closely and continuing our relationship with the FRA on the state and local level, and we are here to answer any questions that you may have of us.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. Ronnie, do you have anything? Or?
I will
thank you.
concur with the chairman.
Senator Ward and Senator Hutchinson have joined us as well. Thank you. Quick question, Gladys, if I could, Madam Chairperson, if I could. About 150 million gallons of crude oil arriving each week into Philadelphia. So I'm glad that the feds are starting to make some changes now. Are they increasing their budget any to do so? Now, I know under Act 89, we've increased some money that's available to the freight, about $10 million, I think, this year, to help with the industry and to help the movement of the product in Pennsylvania to get it to the refineries in Philadelphia and to any plants in Pittsburgh. Is the Fed stepping up with the funding at this point? Have we heard anything more at that?
I don't believe that we have heard anything more. That's something we can look into, but I don't believe we've heard anything more.
And I know they put some precautions in ever since some of the rail accidents with the automatic braking now and expansion of the evacuation area. And I'll ask the folks coming up later about that, and construction standards for retrofitted tanks and mandates for electronic brakes and permanent speed limits and so forth. So this is something that will be in existence. Who enforces those? FRA?
Well, the FRA and the PUC rail safety inspectors will work together to enforce that.
Okay. And I'm assuming the cooperation has been very helpful in this regard and very cooperative. But we ought to make sure, too, that any instances that do occur, that at least our two committees are notified of any problems as they arise. Not that you may not have done it in the past, but as we're seeing more and more concern and where some of these rail freight cars are running through heavily populated areas, I think it's best that Senator Yaw's committee and our committee know so we can share that with our colleagues in the Senate.
We are more than happy to share any information that the two committees may need, but we do emphasize the fact that with the federal law and the preemption of that, the role that we play is more of a supportive role, but we are there to provide any information that you may need.
I appreciate that, and I understand the preemption law, but we're the ones that are burdened with the safety issues and get the phone calls. So I thank you for that. But we're all interested in seeing the product move in a safe way. So we're very appreciative of that. Senator Yaw.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You've given us a lot of information, and one of the things that all your inspectors, you inspect both passenger rail as well as freight. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what we're concerned with this hearing primarily is the transportation of energy products or crude oil. And I believe, if I recall it correctly, you said we have about 700 miles of track that are involved with that particular issue.
Correct.
Maybe I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you this question. If you had to grade the PUC's ability to safely inspect that 700 miles, what grade would you give the PUC about the ability to do that?
Well, I'm going to be biased in my answer. You know, I would say that we have a very good ability based upon the role that we play. We do play a joint role with the FRA, but I will allow Rod to answer it as well.
I don't know what grade I would give it, but I think our inspectors are doing a very
Well,
good
if you
job.
would give yourself an A, I mean, you should say that. But
A minus, how's that?
I was going to say A plus, but okay.
Like the chairman said, we are working in conjunction with FRA over the last couple of years as these crude oil trains, specifically the Bakken crude oil, shipments have increased throughout the state. Not only have our inspectors, but the FRA inspectors have increased their focus on those lines. And as you'll hear the railroad companies who will be speaking later, they'll probably talk about how their inspectors spend more time inspecting those facilities and making sure that they're up to the highest standards for safety.
And something that has to be emphasized as well, as I've learned more about this information, staff has informed me that there's many times that when these trains are coming through Pennsylvania, they're just coming through, and we never even get a chance because they haven't stopped through Pennsylvania to even inspect them. So that's something that has to be noted as well.
when you inspect it, you inspect the line, or do you inspect the equipment also? The tank, the cars?
We would inspect any facet of the operation that we can. So it could be operations, it can be the track structure, or it could be the equipment. So like the chairman said, some of the equipment is moving through the state, and if it doesn't stop at some location, we don't have the ability to inspect it. But while it stops somewhere, if we find it in a rail yard before it moves out, we have our hazardous materials inspectors and our equipment inspectors who would look at those trains. And track as well. As we have in our testimony, our track inspector, as he goes out to inspect, they have to be along with a railroad employee. They can't go out and inspect on their own. So it's kind of a joint inspection at that point.
If you had to raise your own grade from an A minus to an A or an A plus, what would you ask, or what would you need to do that?
Well-
I can answer that.
Go ahead.
Just give me another opportunity we would like to increase the number of inspectors that we do have. We know that there's a lot of factors that takes place in terms of the type of training that they need for us to employ them and things of that nature, but funding is also a big factor with that. And so that's something that we would look at in our budget, maybe to increase it next year when we do put in additional budget for additional number of inspectors. That would be very helpful to us as well. But once again, we are still within our role as a supportive agency to the FRA.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Udicek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. You mentioned in your testimony that is a tri-layer system, that you have the FRA, the PUC, and then self-inspection by the railroad company. You also note that the PUC has no regulatory authority to enforce a discovered violation. Could you walk, it seems to be a complicated process in terms of those tri-layers. If there is a violation discovered by the PUC, how does it work with the private rail companies or the FRA to see that that violation is enforced?
I'll let Rodney answer that.
So as our inspectors perform inspections, and if they find either defects or violations, those are reported directly to the FRA through the laptop equipment that the FRA provides our inspectors. So violations are a little more time-consuming because there's a lot of information has to be gathered to prepare that report. It has to be very complete so that when the FRA takes that violation and sits down with the railroad, and it's my understanding that they'll take a large stack of violations that they have, and it's not just specific to Pennsylvania. It might be for the FRA Region 2, but they'll meet with the railroad companies and go through the violations. Some of them will stand, some of them will get negotiated down, and some might just get thrown out because the case might not be solid. So those violations would warrant some kind of monetary fines.
In your experience, the time frame and the efficiency of that process, do you have confidence in the time frame and efficiency of that process?
From what I understand, I think it works pretty well. The big thing that we're looking for is compliance with the regulations. So, you know, when we write violations, we're looking to get their attention that they're not going to make those same mistakes again, and try to make sure that we're getting safe facilities and safe operations.
Now, I don't know if I missed it. You mentioned about the 700 miles of track, and that's an easy stationary target. You missed some trains that may not stop in Pennsylvania. The human factor in this equation, who is the inspector on the human factor?
So we have an operating practices inspector, and so they're the ones who go out and make sure that the railroad personnel are properly trained and certified, watching their operations, listening to their radio controls. So operating practice would be the inspector that would handle that particular item.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Blake and Senator Stefano have joined us. Thank you, gentlemen. Senator Vogel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question revolves around the bridges. In western Pennsylvania, we have a lot of rail lines across the rivers. Who inspects the bridges? And I know some of these bridges probably have to be 100 years old. Is there any time frame to replace them somehow, or the rails on them somehow? I know a couple years ago, a couple cars full of ethanol come off the track and fell into Beaver River and caused quite a fire and stuff for a few days till it all burned out and everything. Who inspects the bridges, I guess, or what is the time frame? Do you replace bridges? I mean, some of these bridges, like I said, have to be 100 years old. Do we replace them? Do we replace the tracks on them? Who's in charge of the bridges, I guess?
Well, if you're speaking about bridges, railroad bridges
crossing
specifically,
rivers, yes.
If they're exclusive, if they don't cross over a public roadway, the PUC would not have jurisdiction over that. If it's just over a river, then it would be the responsibility of the railroad to inspect and maintain their bridge. So if there's a highway underneath that bridge as well, then the PUC would have jurisdiction over it. You know, we rely on the local municipalities or PennDOT or the railroads to bring bridges to our attention that are becoming deficient or need attention. So we don't have the staff that can go out and inspect these on a regular basis. As far as the time frame goes, it probably just depends on what kind of structure it is, how it was built, and how it's been maintained. So I don't know that we have a specific time frame on when we're looking. We have bridges that are 100 years old, and some of them at this point are really looking for attention and replacement. So
So the railroads own the bridges then?
the ones that they're operating on, most likely, yes. It's not always the case, but
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Chair thanks the panel for your testimony.
Thank you.
Chairperson, thank you, and we'll stay in touch with you because there's some concerns. I have a lot of concerns with the bridges and how quickly we can turn those around. I know the state's got a new program, but if the feds are doing it or if the railroads are doing it, I just want to get some more information on that, but we don't need to take that time today. So thank you
We'd be
very
happy
much.
to work
Appreciate
with you. Thank you.
it.
thank you.
Next testifies Dr. Alan Zaremski, Special Advisor to Governor Wolf, Office of the Governor. I know Governor Wolf has paid particular attention to this issue as well, and we thank you, Doctor, for being here.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Yes, and before you begin, I want to recognize too, thank you, Senator Yall, another member of the administration here is with us today, the Fire Commissioner for Pennsylvania, Tim Solvay. It's good to see you here, Tim. Doctor, if you will, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, ladies. My name is Dr. Alan M. Zaremski. I am a research professor and I'm director of the Railroad Engineering and Safety Program at the University of Delaware. I have been retained by the Office of the Governor to look at issues related to safety of crude by rail, CBR, shipments in the state of Pennsylvania. My team and I have just begun this activity, and we are currently in the data collection phase of the activity. By way of personal background, I have been actively involved in the railway industry for almost 40 years. Prior to my joining the faculty of the University of Delaware in 2012, I was president of Zetatech Inc., a railway technical consulting and applied technology company that I established in 1984 and sold to Harsco Corporation in 2007. Prior to that, I served as Director of R&D for Pandrel Incorporated, Director of R&D for Spino Rail Services Company, and Manager Track Research for the Association of American Railroads. I have a PhD in civil engineering from Princeton University, and I'm a registered professional engineer in 5 states, including Pennsylvania. I am an honorary member of ARIMA, the American Railway Engineering and Maintenance Way Association, a fellow of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and a life member of the American Society of Civil Engineers. I have authored or co-authored over 180 technical papers, over 120 articles, and 2 books. My areas of research include failure and risk analysis of the track and its key components, to include rails, ties, ballasts, turnouts, etc., safety and derailment prevention, improved track inspection technology and applications, vehicle-track dynamic interaction, and track maintenance planning. I have been personally involved in derailment and safety analyses and investigations, including development of methodologies to reduce derailment risk for several major track and operating derailment areas. My activity will address 3 major areas of crude by rail safety in the state of Pennsylvania. 1, derailment risk. 2, tank car breach rupture risk. And 3, regulatory oversight. I would like to point out that for a catastrophic crude by rail event to take place, several elements are necessary. First, a derailment must occur, usually unrelated to the CBR equipment itself. In general, over 85% of derailment causes in the United States and also in the state of Pennsylvania are not related to the cars or the commodities. Second, a breach or rupture of the tank car shell must occur and a release of the crude take place. Third, conditions must be present and the volatility of the commodity must be such as to ignite or explode after the rupture of the tank car. We will be looking at these areas with a specific focus on the first 2 areas. In the area of derailment risk, this assessment will look at the distribution of derailment by major categories: track, operations and human factors, equipment, signals, etc. And then the key subcategories, which would include items such as broken rail, wide gauge, etc. And we will be looking at derailment risk starting at the national level and going and drilling down into the state of Pennsylvania specifically. This will include distribution of derailments by major and subcategories separately for the two major crude by rail carriers in the state, Norfolk Southern and CSX. It should be noted that human factors and track categories represent the largest percentage of accidents and derailments in both the United States in general and in the state of Pennsylvania in particular. For those derailment categories that are high risk, so with a significant number of annual occurrences or significant potential for occurrence of a major tank car failure, such as a high-speed derailment with a potential for a significant tank car breach, my team will identify opportunities for improvement in inspection and/or maintenance practices based on state-of-the-art industry practice, as well as specific practices of railroads operating CBR trains in the state of Pennsylvania. For those categories where a level of risk can be identified, and an example of that would be broken rail derailments, which is a major subcategory derailments, particularly main track derailments and CBR derailments. Recommendations for maximum level of risk will be made based on the potential for catastrophic CBR failure. This, in turn, can allow for further improvement in inspection practices, such as increasing rail testing on high-risk routes. In addition, derailment categories will be identified where a proposed new technology or operating standard will affect the potential of derailment. Areas such as speed reduction, electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, or positive train control. Thus, for example, as speed decreases, the risk that a derailed hazmat car will release its contents also decreases. Note, this activity will make use of the FRA track safety database, which includes both national and Pennsylvania-specific derailment data. In the area of tank car breach rupture risk, the assessment will examine the proposed improvements to the tank cars, such as improved head shields, increased tank car shell thickness, external jackets, valve protection to include top and bottom valves, reduction in train speed, and will qualitatively identify the potential increases in safety. This assessment is to include the effect of proposed new FRA and industry standards for tank car design and train operations. In the area of regulatory oversight, the assessment will review the current safety oversight capabilities and resources of the state of Pennsylvania's Department of Transportation, as well as those of other states with major rail transportation infrastructure, and in particular those that carry crude by rail trains. It will identify opportunities for improvement of safety through improved regulations, state inspections, coordination with the Federal Railway Administration, and other areas of opportunity. I welcome your questions at this time.
Thank you. No questions, Senator Bartolotto.
Thank you so much for being here. Just a quick question. You were mentioning your expertise in derailment. Would you strongly recommend then that we use the automatic brake system to prevent an issue that we just realized in Philly? Is that something you would recommend to always
Are we
use?
talking about the recent Amtrak derailment?
Right.
Where there was no automatic train control on that northbound route, but they are in the process of instituting positive train control, which basically supersedes and is more effective than the automatic train control. And as you are aware, there is currently a federal mandate for railroads to introduce positive train control nationwide.
Is that something you would like to see happen right away? Especially with the increased transportation of hazardous materials in Pennsylvania.
Right away, it basically involves assessing what are the different levels of risks and where do we get the best bang for our money. If you look statistically at where the derailments come from and where specifically a lot of the recent crude by rail derailments, the national ones that come from, not that many of them are actually directly affected by positive train control. So I'm not convinced at this point that positive train control jumps to the top of the priority list when it comes to preventing these classes of derailments. I'm not convinced that putting the resources initially in other areas, for example, improved rail testing and rail inspection, because we do know that broken rails are a major factor for both derailments in general and crude by rail derailments in particular. So it may be, from a prioritization point of view, more effective to put our resources in where the higher probabilities of risk are, and then continue to move down the risk area to encompass areas such as positive train control. Again, I'm talking about specifically crude by rail. Passenger operations is another issue, and there the priorities may change for passenger rail operations.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Blake.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doctor, thank you for your testimony and for your work for the Office of the Governor. Just a point of clarity, is it true that the federal regulatory agencies have issued new standards relative to the attributes of the construction of the rail cars themselves for crude transport?
Yes, the Department of Air Transportation has issued a new set of guidelines for tank cars that carry hazardous material, and particularly crude oil. Yes.
And what, in your estimation, would be the transition time between the implementation of those guidelines and the production of those?
Well, I don't remember the exact schedule that was put into the orders, but we're certainly talking about a period of years. We're talking about replacing hundreds of thousands of tank cars, of course.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Yaw.
Thank you. Just a general question. When you do your risk assessment, do you take into consideration where the rail is located, for example, populations, areas, or population density or anything like that? It seems to me like that looking hindsight, we built our refineries and things like that in population centers where the only way to get the crude by rail there is to go through the population center, where maybe if we had the perfect world, we would build refineries out somewhere where the risk was less. Do you take that into consideration when you're doing your risk assessment?
I certainly do, yes.
Thank you.
Senator Vogt.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. On the valve protection on the train cars, do you take into consideration temperature fluctuations? Are the valves set somehow that if it's 20 below in South Dakota when they're loading oil and they get here to Pennsylvania at 60 degrees, is there a thing on the valves to somehow keep them from popping off or anything like that? Is there some kind of system like that that alleviates for or something for temperature fluctuations, I guess? Is that part of what you look at as well?
Off the top of my head, I do not recall whether there's any specific protection or not. When we look at the CBR type of derailments that are the focus of the attention of certainly my study, where we're looking at the explosive ones, they're almost invariably associated with a derailment. So generally we're talking about an incident where there's a derailment, then there's enough energy within this course of the derailment that there is a physical breach of the tank car. And it could be a damage to the valve, but we're not looking at a temperature fluctuation related damage. We're looking more along the lines of a mechanical accident related damage. And then if there's a release of crude, then there would be an ignition and either fire or explosion. So that's the focus of the attention I'm looking at. I think what you're referring to may be more associated with, is there any pop-off of valves, any leaking that comes beyond the tank car?
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any major CBR event that has happened in that manner.
Okay, thank you.
Chair wants to take the opportunity as well to recognize one of our partners, Representative Bill Keller. Representative Keller is a Democrat chair of the House Transportation Committee. We're very happy to have him here today. He recognizes, as do all of us, and Senator Yaw and I have had this conversation about the Port of Philadelphia becoming a real energy hub here now in this quadrant of the state, or with the state and the adjoining states as well, the movement of product there, the Port of Philadelphia. So we want to make sure that we're doing the utmost for efficiency and certainly safety. Doctor, there were some articles in the Philadelphia Inquirer recently, and I don't know if you had the chance to review those, about the movement of liquids through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and I thought they were very informative. They, as we do, recognize the importance to make sure that we maintain a high standard to ensure the safety of the residents and certainly the railroad workers, and also be efficient in the movement of the product, which we know needs to get to the Port of Philadelphia. But one of the articles, I think, was some of the workers who have said that the tracks themselves have been neglected for years. and that they thought that that was part of the problems, the maintenance of the tracks. Are you familiar with that as well?
I'm not familiar with that at all. In fact, my general impression of certainly the mainline tracks where you operate crude by rail trains and other hazardous materials tend to be well maintained and well inspected. The railroads have been investing a significant amount of capital in upgrading track. What we used to call deferred maintenance was a problem many years ago, but certainly in the last decade or so, railroads have worked very hard to catch up on deferred maintenance. So to my knowledge, I'm not aware of any neglected track, certainly track that would carry crude by rail on the main line.
I'm very happy to hear that. And it could have been that it was some old information, but I'm glad you clarified that. Just one quick question. If you don't know, maybe the rail folks will know. Are there a certain limit set by law to tank cars attached to a diesel? And if there are, or if there is it commensurate with the experience of the engineer? A brand new engineer can only transport 20 cars, as a more experienced engineer can transport 80 cars. Is there anything like that in our regs?
To the best of my memory, I don't believe there's anything in the FRA standards for that. Now, as terms of the railroad practice, in terms of who they assign to operate crude by rail trains, certainly the railways have a lot of leeway in determining who are the train engineers, the operators of the train.
Thank you, and I thank you for clarifying the importance of the track condition. Thank you, Doctor. Thank the Governor for having you come over and testify. Next to testify is Mr. Rudy Husband, Resident Vice President, Norfolk Southern, and Mr. Quentin Kendall, Vice President, CSX Transportation.
I didn't mind the promotion.
What's that, Quentin? Okay. Thank you, gentlemen. Rudy's certainly known here around the Capitol, so it's good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, all of you, for allowing us to come and talk about a very important issue, and that's moving crude oil by rail. My name's Rudy Husband. I handle government relations for Norfolk Southern, based here in Harrisburg. I have been with the railroad for 27 years. And I've had the honor of calling Pennsylvania home for the last 25 years. Just to provide a very brief overview of what Norfolk Southern is all about, we are one of the largest freight railroads in the United States. We operate over 20,000 route miles in 22 states, primarily east of the Mississippi River. We have 30,000 employees. Pennsylvania, for us, is the largest state in terms of number of employees, miles operated, revenue out of our 22-state network. We have 5,000 employees here in Pennsylvania, and our annual payroll comes in at around $340 million. Our major employment centers are Allentown, Altoona, Harrisburg, and Pittsburgh. Last year, we purchased more than $1 billion in goods and services from Pennsylvania vendors, and we paid $34 million in state and local taxes. Since 2011, we have invested $610 million in our infrastructure in the Commonwealth. Specifically as it relates to crude oil, we operate anywhere between 14 and 25 crude oil unit trains weekly through the Commonwealth, and they are heading to either refineries or transload facilities in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. And just to give you some context, because crude oil is receiving a lot of attention nationally in the media, obviously in state governments and federal government, crude oil makes up less than 2% of our total business. So it's important, but in the grand scheme of things, it's relatively small. As part of today's panel discussion, I am going to focus on what the rail industry is doing to improve safety, basically the regulatory environment that's occurred in DC over the last few years. And then Quentin Kendall, my colleague from CSX, is going to talk about the industry's investment in the National Freight Network, the industry's partnerships with emergency responders, and also talking about some track inspection procedures. We hope that we can, and obviously we're going to defer to you on how this goes, but we would like to get through our presentations and then we'll take some questions. But okay, thank you. The growth of North American oil in recent years represents an important opportunity for the United States to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. And this is a good thing. You can look at what is happening in the Philadelphia region, and Chairman Keller is here, and he can certainly attest to the fact that crude oil and crude by rail has basically saved the refineries in southeastern Pennsylvania and in Delaware and in North Jersey. And it's been important for economic development and for state and local tax bases. But safety is obviously paramount. And from 2000 through 2014, U.S. railroads terminated 1.405 million carloads of crude oil, and more than 99.99% of those cars reached their destination without an incident due to an accident. So over the past several years, there have been numerous discussions between the rail industry and appropriate agencies in Washington about how to further enhance safety on the movement of crude oil by rail. And in your packet, you will see a chronology of the steps the rail industry has taken since 2009 on advocating for stronger safety standards as far as moving crude oil and other flammable liquids. But I want to focus on two significant steps. The first occurred January of last year, when U.S. DOT Secretary Fox basically convened a meeting of all stakeholders, railroads, refineries, energy companies, government agencies, and basically tasked everybody with coming together and coming up with ways to improve or enhance the safety of moving crude oil by rail. And as a result of that meeting, on February 21st, U.S. DOT and the rail industry announced a rail operation safety initiative that instituted various new voluntary safety operating practices regarding the movement of crude by rail. And these voluntary practices went far beyond the Association of American Railroads best practices, as well as the FRA's emergency orders. And the key elements of that emergency order, or that voluntary agreement, was risk assessment routing analysis that utilized at a minimum 27 different safety and security factors to evaluate which rail routes crude by rail would move over. Speed restrictions, especially in high-threat urban areas as defined by the Department of Homeland Security. So in Pennsylvania, those high-threat urban areas are Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. And what you do is basically you draw a 10-mile circle around those two cities, and that's your high-threat urban area. And within those areas, the maximum speed limit for crude oil trains was 40 miles an hour. And I can assure you that in those areas, the actual train speed is a lot less. Additional rail inspections above federal requirements, additional advanced trackside detectors above federal requirements, training and tuition assistance for first responders. We created a local emergency response resource inventory for the communities that we operate crude oil through, and increased use of end-of-train devices or distributed power to enhance braking for crude oil trains. The second significant step on the regulatory front occurred this past May 1st, when U.S. DOT issued its final rule for enhanced tank car standards and operational controls for high-hazard flammable trains, HHFTs, which are basically crude oil trains that meet certain requirements. And the rule applies to trains that contain a continuous block of 20 or more tank cars loaded with crude oil or other flammable liquids, or 35 or more loaded flammable liquid cars, regardless of where they were in the train. The new rule actually codified a lot of what was in that 2014 voluntary agreement. And in your packet, and Senator Blake, that goes to your earlier question, there is a schedule in there on the retrofitting of tank cars, but there's also the summary of all the provisions of the new rule. But I'll just briefly summarize the high points of the new rule. There are enhanced tank cars or enhanced standards for new tank cars to be used in HHFT service, as well as retrofitting of existing tank cars when those cars are intended for HHFT service. Braking systems utilizing two-way end-of-train devices or distributed power, and later electronically controlled pneumatic brakes, or ECP brakes. Reduced operating speeds in certain areas. This codified the earlier voluntary agreement about speed restrictions in high-threat urban areas, and also maximum a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit regardless of outside of the high-threat urban areas. More accurate classification of the unrefined petroleum-based products, and routing analysis and inclusion of HHFTs and security plans, along with coordination with emergency responders. The rail industry is going to comply with the requirements of the new rule as they become legally effective, but it should be noted that the industry has serious concerns about the ECP brake requirements and the potential adverse impacts on the fluidity on the national freight network. I'd like to further note that there have been at least 5 appeals filed so far challenging the new rule. At least one of those appeals focuses on ECP brakes. I want to move briefly over to tank car standards. As new crude oil sources are used for energy production, and as modeling of tank car failures and derailments becomes more sophisticated, and as commercially available materials of construction improve in the marketplace, we must address the opportunities to reduce the risk of tank cars failing in an accident. Improved tank car construction standards for new builds and retrofits are a must. And at this point, just so everyone is clear, railroads, generally speaking, do not own these tank cars. These cars are owned by the energy companies or rail car leasing companies, and they are responsible for the maintenance of those cars. By law, as a common carrier, as long as those cars meet federal standards, we have to move them. We cannot say no. The Association of American Railroads, AAR, and you're going to hear a lot of acronyms here, I'm sorry. The AAR Tank Car Committee sets the standards for how tank cars are used in North America, are designed and constructed. These standards often exceed the requirements of federal standards. And the Tank Car Committee is composed or comprised of railroads, rail car owners, rail car manufacturers, and rail hazmat customers that lease the tank cars, with active participation from both US DOT and Transport Canada and the NTSB. The NTSB has been recommending enhanced standards for DOT 111 tank cars. Those are the workhorse tank cars in the flammable liquids fleet. And as an industry, we have also been aggressively advocating for improved tank car standards. And we agree with the NTSB's recommendations and will continue to work with the NTSB to see that those standards are implemented. In March of 2011, the AAR petitioned the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA. PHMSA regulates tank cars. To adopt more stringent standards for new tank cars used in transport packing group 1 and 2 hazardous materials, which would include most crude oils. Those tougher standards called for more puncture resistance through the use of thicker tank car shells or a jacket, extra protective head shields on either end of the car, and additional protection of the fittings on the top of the car. Unfortunately, PHMSA did not act on the AAR's proposal, and so the AAR implemented its own rules for new tank cars, which basically led to the CPC 1232 tank car. And so those new standards became effective on new cars ordered after October 1st, 2011. On November 2013, the rail industry filed rulemaking comments to PHMSA's notice of proposed rulemaking, recommending adoption of safety standards even more stringent than the CPC 1232 for new cars being built to transport flammable liquids. This recommendation also called for aggressively retrofitting and or phasing out older tank cars used in the transport of flammable liquids. The final rule issued by US DOT in May, new tank cars constructed after October 1st, 2015 and used in the HHFT train service are required to meet new standards. The prescribed car has a 9/16" tank shell, 11-gauge jacket, half-inch full-height head shields, thermal protection, and improved pressure relief valves and bottom outlet valves. And existing tank cars must be retrofitted in the same with the same key components based on a specific retrofit schedule, which again is in your packet. The final rule will require retrofitting or replacing the DOT 111 tank cars used in HHFT service for Packing Group 1, which covers most crude shipped by rail, within 3 years, and all non-jacketed CPC 1232s in the same service within approximately 5 years. Note that in contrast to the rules in Canada, the legacy DOT 111s will not be entirely phased out of flammable liquid service in the United States. Even in the end of the phase-out schedule, they will be permitted as long as they are not used in so-called high-hazard flammable trains. This means that railroads will need to determine how many of each kind of tank car the shippers are using to ensure that upgraded tank cars, or alternatively, not too many of the older DOT 111s or CPC 1232s are in a particular train, or else be required to implement a variety of operational restrictions that could affect service and the fluidity of the freight network. The rail industry has advocated for the Canadian approach, which the US DOT has not adopted. We believe that the final rule should have been stronger regarding the pool fire survivability standards. The AAR and the American Petroleum Institute, API, raised this issue when they submitted joint comments on tank car standards in response to the proposed PHMSA rulemaking last September. AAR and API urged PHMSA to adopt requirements for a thermal blanket as part of the thermal protection system. AAR also recommended a thermal conductivity standard for a thermal blanket that prior modeling shows would generally achieve 800 minutes of survivability in a pool fire as compared to the 100-minute pool fire survivability standard specified in the final rule. The 100-minute pool fire survivability standard in the final rule does little, if anything, to enhance the performance of these cars. Unfortunately, PHMSA didn't even discuss these recommendations when it published its final rule, but quite frankly, we, the industry, government agencies need to do a better job because it is unacceptable, and I'm sure that the panel that's going to follow will talk about the importance of the survivability of tank cars in a pool fire and how that affects emergency response. The NTSB shares our concern on this based on the April 3rd, 2015 safety recommendation that they submitted to PHMSA. They are also concerned about this 100-minute survivability standard. NTSB further advised that in the safety recommendation that thermal blankets that are already in use on cars that are used to transport liquefied petroleum gases have the capacity to provide protection that significantly exceeds the 100-minute performance standard when used on flammable liquid cars. The rail industry would welcome whatever assistance these committees, the General Assembly, or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would be willing to offer in urging PHMSA to address this important aspect of tank car standards. In conclusion, on my part of this presentation, the most important point I want to leave you with is that we aren't waiting for experts to come in to tell us how we need to improve safety. We're not waiting for letters from the governor urging us to improve safety. We are working constantly to identify ways, working with our customers, working with government agencies, working with emergency responders to eliminate what amounts to 1/100% of risk, because if you're on that side of the coin, you're not going to have a very good day, and we understand that. We understand that we have a responsibility to move not only crude oil, but every commodity that we move, to move it safely through the communities that we operate through, and we welcome having that ongoing dialogue to ensure that we do that. So with that, I thank you, and I will turn it over to Quentin.
Thank you, Mr. Husband, Mr. Kendall, and thank you, gentlemen, for the thorough written materials, which we will read through. So when you highlight them, we appreciate that very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. Very much appreciate you having me here today to discuss CSX's role in safely and efficiently moving goods in the Commonwealth. Just to avoid frustration, I've amended my verbal testimony from the written, so if you try to follow along, just keep reading. Eventually you'll catch up with me. Now, we really appreciate that rail safety is a topic of concern for you and the citizens of Pennsylvania, and of course, it's our highest priority at CSX and in the railroad industry, the safety of communities, of our employees, and our customers' freight. And I think the timing of this hearing is very appropriate. As Rudy mentioned, there were several recent actions by the federal government which, layered on top of the ongoing efforts by the railroad, are going to make a safe industry even safer. So my remarks were drafted in conjunction with Rudy's, and the things that I'm going to cover here are historical trends on the improvement of rail safety, the rail industry's investment in the U.S. transportation network, a focus on important inspection and maintenance protocols we undertake to keep our railroad running safely. And I'm going to spend a decent amount of time on this because I know you all had a lot of questions on it. I'd say the extraordinary partnership between the railroads and state and local first responders and emergency management organizations here in Pennsylvania. And finally, how we coordinate with those entities to share information about our train routes and the cargo that we carry. But before I get started, I want to reiterate what Chairman Brown said, and I think it's important to note that rail shipment of hazardous materials are regulated by federal law, and under federal interstate commerce, all common carriers are required to transport any commodity tendered to them in a safe container, and that railroads, in fact, own less than 1% of the tank cars that are currently in the fleets. But first, let me give you a little bit of commercial about my company, CSX, and our role in the Pennsylvania transportation system. So safety as a way of life is something that we say a lot around our headquarters and throughout our network. It's something you're going to hear me talk about a lot today. So we maintain a steadfast commitment to the safety of our operations and the communities in which we operate. On any given day, there are 1,300 trains and 20,000 freight cars on our lines carrying things Americans use every day. The cars we drive, the orange juice we drink, the energy that turns on the light, and the big screen TVs that we buy at Walmart. So annually, we move more than 6 million carloads of finished products and raw materials, 1.8 million here in Pennsylvania, that are crucial to our economy and our way of life. And this does include petroleum crude oil, a growing market for us, but one that still only represents 2 to 3% of our business. And as everyone here knows, we're a crucial supplier specifically to the refineries in eastern Pennsylvania, which have seen a resurgence with the rapid rise of domestic crude oil production. It's an amazing American story about how this has progressed, but it's a tremendous opportunity that requires us as transporters of this product to take a great responsibility in making sure it gets where it needs to go safely. So we're proud of our partnership with the Philadelphia Energy Solutions, which directly employs nearly 1,000 Pennsylvanians and supports thousands of additional jobs in the region. We work with them constantly as they too are committed to the safe transport of this product. Still, though, as I mentioned, to fully realize the benefits of domestic energy production, we need to accept the responsibility that comes with moving this product and ensure the safety of our employees, our communities, and our environment remain the top priority. So going a little bit past the energy business, we've heavily invested in Pennsylvania operations in recent years. We operate a thriving intermodal terminal in Philadelphia, pretty modern facility located directly across the street from the port. And last year we completed a $30 million program to remove overhead clearances coming in and out of the port. So that way we can run double stack trains, which makes the Port of Philadelphia more competitive. We do have a similar facility in Chambersburg, and we're in the process of building a new one in the Pittsburgh area as well. So in recent years, you hear many policymakers talk about a rail renaissance. We need to have a rail renaissance for passengers and freight, which can offset highway congestion and really help to meet the growing demand from the American public for consumer goods. At CSX, Pennsylvania is and will continue to be part of that rail renaissance. So I want to shift a little bit here towards safety and just talk about where we've been. And Dr. Zaremski mentioned this. You go back to 1980, before the rail industry was deregulated, and we used to have things that they were called standing derailments. Trains would just be on a track, and a wheel would fall off. It came from a pathetic lack of investment in the system. Since that time, and since the rail industry was deregulated under President Carter, it has allowed us to invest heavily into our system. And frankly, it's made significant reductions in train accidents, specifically involving hazardous material. So we've gotten 94% better since 1980 and 62% better since 2000. So in 2014, there were 19 rail incidents nationally that involved hazmat releases, an industry low. So noting this fact, U.S. DOT Secretary Anthony Fox, when he released the rule we discussed on Monday, said, 2014, nearly 500,000 carloads containing more than 410 million barrels of crude oil were transported by rail in the United States. 99.9% reached their destination without incident. I think there are probably more decimals on nines, but I'm going to quote him verbatim. Across the board, the investment in infrastructure, technology, and training of our employees have resulted in stunning improvements. So some facts since 1980. Derailments are down 45%, a new low. Track cause accidents are down 54%, again, a new low. Human factor accidents, something where the operator did something wrong, are down 45%, a new low. And equipment caused accidents are down 45%, a new low. These are great numbers, but despite this progress, we also very much agree with Secretary Fox's follow-up comment to the original ones, that the accidents that have occurred have shown us that 99.9% isn't good enough. And we're going to continue to strive toward our goal of zero accidents. So I'm going to shift a little bit now in terms of investment in the U.S. transportation network. And we, like the entire rail industry, invest heavily in our track and our infrastructure to ensure a safe, reliable, and efficient rail network. Our private capital investments, track, bridges, equipment, and technology, are projected to be $2.5 billion this year, meaning that we're committed to investing around 17%, about 17% of our revenue into the business. If you do comparables of other manufacturing, it's 5 times as much generally of what they will reinvest into their business. And this is true of the entire rail industry, where this year alone, $29 billion or $80 million a day is invested in the 140,000-mile U.S. rail network. And since 1980, Class I railroads have spent over $533 billion on track and equipment. That's private capital, not taxpayer money, that supports the nation's freight network. And I would note a lot of that freight network also hosts passenger rail service. So I want to talk a little bit now about what's been discussed earlier about maintaining rail operations. Sometimes it's not intuitive how this works, and the expectation is that there are government entities who oversee the inspections, who do it, and they do, and we partner with them regularly. But I think it's really important to note that rail lines, bridges, and freight yards are our physical plant. We've got a vested interest in and fiduciary duty to ensure they're regularly inspected and properly maintained. It's just plain good business for us to be safe. If we're not safe, no one wants us to deliver their cargo to them. It's a risk. So approximately 25% of the CSX workforce is involved in maintaining and improving track, signals, and grade crossings to support safe conditions throughout the network. Now I'm going to offer some data that's specific about CSX inspection and maintenance protocols, but I ask you to appreciate the fact that the protocols of the Norfolk Southern and most of the rail industry is similar, if not identically stringent. So, but first I want to, before we even get to what we're doing here to make crude route safety, let's just talk about what an enterprise it is to keep 21,000 miles of track up and going. If we can get the first slide here. This just underscores the magnitude of effort involved in keeping our infrastructure in good working order. So this year, we're going to replace 3.3 million ties. And I point to graphic 1 here. This is an Aurora inspection machine, a cool little high-tech device we use that we run over rails, that it's not just a visual inspection look, but we're actually using technology and computer systems to find out which rails are going to need replacement. We're replacing 510 miles of rail this year with new rail. We're installing 3 million tons of ballast, and we're surfacing more than 5,000 miles of existing rail to make sure it's a smooth ride and it's aligned. So this again is from the Aurora tie scan equipment. And this, again, it ensures the integrity of our cross ties. So let's talk a little bit about how inspections work. Our Federal Railroad Administration is our safety regulatory agency, and they have uniform and very specific regulatory standards as to the frequency and protocol to which railroads inspect different types of track. And I quoted the regulatory site there to show that it is a schedule. But I'll tell you, in the overwhelming majority of instances, specifically on crude oil routes, CSX and Norfolk Southern have implemented inspection protocols on their lines that are more rigorous than the federal regulatory requirements. We're doing more. We understand their concerns here about the movement of this new product, and therefore we're putting more investment and more attention into them. So the standard rule is the FRA requires trained track inspectors to conduct regular visual inspection of all mainline track twice per week. CSX performs these inspections at least 3 times per week on crude oil. So you have, let's flip to the next slide. So you will have someone or groups of people responsible for lines of track 70 to 100 miles that they will visually inspect every day on a high rail vehicle to make sure that it's safe. But I'm going to tell you, this is the challenge that our crews have in ensuring the integrity of our rail, and perhaps Dr. Zaremski can help us figure this out. So the picture on the left shows a fissure in the rail unseen by human eye. So that's a little thing that's happening beneath the railhead, and over time, based on the pressure and the weight of the cargo, can either slowly or rapidly expand. This requires, obviously, a more sophisticated means of rail testing. The picture on the left shows a vertical split railhead that was detected by ultrasonic testing. So that's just, you see that thing, if it splits through the top, you have a big problem. But we found this, and we took this rail out of service. But I point to you the challenge of this. It's, you know, when you hear about derailments due to broken rail, it's not because a piece of rail is sticking up, you know, perpendicular to the rail that no one noticed. It's because I'm not a metallurgist, but this is a challenging business, and we do retain people who this is their business to help us get smarter on this. So FRA requires this sophisticated ultrasound inspections once a year. So the federal requirement is we do this once a year to detect internal defects and fissures and conform the integrity of the steel rails. CSX conducts these tests on crude oil routes between 3 times a year and once a month, depending on the route. And we have 18 dedicated Sperry vehicles that cover 85,000 miles of rail annually. So we're going to show you this. And in your package, this is going to be graphic 4. I told you I mixed this thing up. So this is one of the Sperry vehicles, and it shows how they find defects, cracks, or other conditions that create a weakened rail. So most of these vehicles will travel down the railroad at 5 miles per hour in between trains when they have track time, frequently stopping so crews can visually inspect track that appear weakened, that the computer is telling them is weakened. But we also, CSX has a waiver from the FRA to operate what's known as continuous rail testing vehicles, something different than this, that instead of stopping, will test the track at approximately 17 miles an hour, but also electronically collect the ultrasound data about the soundness of the rail through specialized software that will help us sort of inform future testing frequencies. So are we picking up the fact that, you know, we may have issues here a couple of months down the line? Well, let's move this up in the inspection. Helps us assign risks so we can use this. In 2014, by the use of these ultrasound inspection equipment, we detected 10,615 rail defects that were corrected. And another almost 1,100 rail service failures, things that would have caused a problem, but were detected because of the stringent inspections and corrected in time. So our protocol is, and I believe you guys are the same, if a defect is detected, we're going to immediately restrict speed on that line to 10 miles an hour. We're going to take it down, and we're going to replace that rail within 24 hours. And some of the recent, in fact, the Lynchburg derailment in April of 2014 that many of you heard about, we had done the testing on this, and we had recognized the defect, but at the time, and the federal requirement is, I think you need to go back within 30 days to do it. We had scheduled it 2 days. In 2 days after it was detected, unfortunately, the derailment happened the day before we were going to come back and correct it. Another thing that we do here is geometry. We use geometry cars to test track structure. So they're going to assess the shape of the track, the gauge, the distance between the two pieces of rail, the profile, and how worn the rail is. And this supplements the routine visual track inspection that's conducted by the maintenance crew. So these are 4 of our rail-bound units. They're going to travel 50,000 miles each year, testing the core network at least 3 times annually. I don't know if I mentioned that on the Sperry vehicle, we do the 85 million. This is going to be 50 million. Now, 2 of these are obviously towed by a locomotive, and 2 are actually self-propelled. And it's going to test the track structure at anywhere between 35 and 60 miles an hour, and it's going to measure the rail wear. The TG3 up in the upper left here is equipped with a track geometry network computer system and several subsystems for analyzing track parameters. And it has theater seating in the back facing the back. So we actually have engineering personnel who will ride this, and they will, you'll get on in Chicago and you'll go down to Nashville, and you're measuring this, but you're also visually inspecting at a senior level. So it's another degree of oversight on the people whose territory this is responsible. One last issue I think is important because we are here in Pennsylvania, we have so much business that's destined for Philadelphia. We have made a significant priority on designated yard track. Because often we will bring the trains in to the refineries, but they can't get in immediately, so we'll hold them in one of our yard tracks. We actually have upgraded yard landing tracks where we'll put loaded crude oil trains, and we inspect these trains twice per month, or we inspect these tracks because it is important, because with the amount of business, we need them to be safe even when they're standing in the yard. So I want to switch over a little bit on to our relationship with Pennsylvania first responders. We've just talked about a concentrated inspection and maintenance protocols, but despite all this, we know accidents are still happening when shipping hazardous material. So that's why CSX and Norfolk Southern both have a pretty significant and long history of working with emergency first responders and emergency planners on how to respond to a rail-related emergency. We want to prevent them, but if they happen, we need to be able to partner with state and local authorities to address them. And again, I'm going to speak here specifically about CSX training efforts, but I want to underscore that Norfolk Southern is equally committed to this effort and has a strong, if not stronger, track record of training and support here in Pennsylvania. So we invest each year in training for first responders to prepare them to handle rail-related emergencies. And since 2004, we've trained probably about 10,000 emergency first responders in Pennsylvania. A lot of different ways we do. We'll do hands-on sessions. We'll do classroom training at local fire stations, exercises and tabletop drills, and even web-based and self-study training courses. So these really help strengthen the railroad's partnership with first responders. And I would guess that our colleagues who are coming up speaking from Lancaster County would agree that not only is the training invaluable in terms of ensuring they know the latest techniques on how to respond, but also it's important on building partnerships and relationships. I think we all agree it's critical that railroad personnel and local responders don't meet for the first time over a derailed train. If they have a relationship, they're going to feel more comfortable with each other and get down to addressing the problem at hand. So a real quick inventory of recent initiatives. Last year we started the safety train program that kicked off here in Eddystone and Philadelphia and went through Erie. 18 cities, 350 organizations. Basically, we brought out multiple different types of tank cars, and we allowed first responders a full-day training session to climb up and learn about them, because each tank car has different characteristics, so they need to know what to do in case of an emergency with those. We would do multiple sessions, we would do weekends and nights, so we had volunteer agencies be able to participate. Over the past 2 years, we've offered comprehensive crude oil specific tabletop exercises in Philadelphia, Montgomery, Bucks, Erie, and Delaware counties. And then more than 2,300 Philadelphia emergency responders over the last 3 years participated in fire department training sessions. We sponsored 6 responders from Pennsylvania to attend a week-long hands-on crude oil training class in Pueblo, Colorado, that's run by the American Association of Railroads. And look into the future, later this year, emergency management coordinators from 12 Pennsylvania counties will attend training classes at our facility in Atlanta. We recognize that knowledge and training is essential for all public sector emergency management personnel, not just those on the front line. The people who do the planning need to understand this well. So I want to close with some of the new and innovative ways the rail industry seeks to partner with state and local first responders and emergency management agencies to ensure they have the tools to respond in the rare case of a rail industry. So both CSX and Norfolk Southern are currently rolling out state-of-the-art information sharing technology tools for emergency responders. These are mobile applications, so it's going to allow someone responding to the scene to obtain information in the field on just about any type of advice about the contents of a single hazmat car or an entire train. So gone will be we're using technology or something that everyone has, all of us have one of them. So instead of having to find if there's a rail incident, find the crew, figure out what's on the train, you can pull it up on your mobile phone. In addition, there's a Secure Now partnership. Can we flip to that one? That's established with the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency last January. And this provides PEMA with near real-time tracking and identification of all of our trains and the commodities they're carrying that enter, move through, and depart the Commonwealth. So you see everything that's coming in and out. Quick identification for PEMA of trains by type, including crude oil. And we put a filter on that allows PEMA to readily identify hazmat trains, including crude and TEH. And also, it goes even deeper than this. It's not just map. By clicking on the train icons, you can actually get detailed information on the train consist and what is in every single car. So this information can be used to rapidly respond to any incident that may occur. So this was so successful, the partnership with PEMA, that we expanded it to the Philadelphia Office of Emergency Management, which is one of only 2 cities that this is installed in. So I'm going to close here, and I want to thank you for having me today, commend your leadership on this and your concern. This is an important issue. We also appreciate Governor Wolf's interest in rail safety, and we're committed to work with him and you on this mutual interest. There is an ongoing rail renaissance. It's a great opportunity for this country, but with the opportunity comes responsibility, and CSX and Norfolk Southern are going to continue to work with you, federal regulators, local officials and communities to make the safe transportation of hazardous material even safer. Mr. Chairman, member of the committee, thank you again. I'm happy to take, Rudy and I are happy to take any questions you may have.
Thank you. We'll have a couple of quick questions. I'm going to start with one. I commend you for your education classes for the first responders. Does either of the railroads contribute equipment to any of the fire companies, most especially those volunteer fire companies that are in some of the boroughs or class cities where the trains may be running? Are there ever any donations in that regard to help them out with equipment that may be necessary to fight a fire or handle a spill should one occur in those areas?
I'll take it. So we through our corporate citizenship program, we have over the years, and I'm sure you've done the same, develop a strong program to assist local first responders with any sorts of needs in terms of equipment. In terms of directly responding, providing equipment such as foam to first responders, we haven't done that up till now because we have our foam and equipment networked across Pennsylvania and the Northeast and the Mid-Atlantic. So if something happens, we will have equipment there within hours to supplement the local first responders.
Within hours? Yeah.
I mean, at the latest.
Understood.
I mean, sometimes.
Understood. And I appreciate the rapid response that you would have. My concern is the local volunteer fire companies that gone are the days when they did hoagie sales, when they can't do it anymore for the equipment because of the expense of the equipment. Is there something that we could look at or you could look at to maybe assist them? And I'm sure Tim Solvay has some ideas for you that could assist them with some of the equipment that may be needed in any of these instances. Hopefully, you never have to use it.
Yeah,
It sits there
absolutely.
dusty, but
It's insurance.
that type of thing. If you could just take a look at that as your good citizen corporate partners that you are. So,
Certainly.
thank you, Senator Yaw.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions and comments. I think that you both testified that crude by rail is only about 2 to 3% of your book of business. Did I understand that correctly?
That's correct. Yep.
Mr. Husband, you made a comment, and maybe I didn't understand it, that you don't own the tank cars.
That's correct.
How do you ensure that the most up-to-date tank cars then are being used on your line? And what if somebody tries to put one on that, doesn't meet current standards? How do you deal with that?
Well, as long as the car, it's not that they can put an out-of-service tank car on a train. It's the cars will meet certain federal standards, and the minimum is a DOT 111. And we, on DOT 111s, we have to move them. We can't say no, and that's the risk that we accept, and that is placed upon us by federal regulations.
Chairman Yaw, we will routinely, not routinely, always, tank cars will be inspected before they start moving. So a faulty tank car, something that's wrong with it, will be taken out. It won't be allowed to move. But Rudy's right, in terms of the packaging, we're working together with the shippers and the federal government to upgrade the standards of this. The DOT 111 has been you said the workhorse for years. The rail industry several years ago determined that this probably wasn't sufficient for all sorts of different flammable materials, and through the regulatory process, we're working with all partners to make them stronger going forward.
Okay, thank you. One other comment that you made is in 2014, there were 500,000 carloads of crude oil transported, and 99.9% arrived without incident. Do you have any information about how many carloads of crude by rail came into, for example, the Port of Philadelphia? Or could you estimate?
Well,
we can get that for you. I don't have that.
Certainly we would have records of cars that were delivered to destination. So whether it's the facilities that Norfolk Southern's serving or the facilities that CSX is serving, yeah, we would know how many cars were delivered in 2014 to those facilities.
And I guess along those same lines, I'd like to know how many of those deliveries occurred without incident also? Maybe none, all of them.
Well,
occurred without
I will tell
incident.
you specifically about ours. As many of you are aware, in January of 2014, we had a derailment on a unit train of crude oil coming into Philadelphia on the Arsenal Bridge over the Schuylkill River. This was a situation whereby the track maintenance work on this type of bridge was not done properly, and what happened is a derailment, so you ended up with tank cars leaning. This was one of your classic Philadelphia winters that we saw over the last 2 years. It was negative 20 degrees outside, and we spent about a week safely trying to move those cars off. No discharge of product. This was a situation where there's something wrong with the track structure. So that is one example. And then I think summer of 2014, there was a yard derailment of a train waiting to get into a refinery, moving 4 or 5 miles an hour, where a wheel fell off the track. No tippage or anything. It's what we call so it was, there was no discharge, nothing tipped over. And what that caused us to do was we ended up dedicating more yard tracks specifically for crude oil. So those were the two instances that happened. on our line, no discharge of product, no breach of the tank car, no damage to environment or to people, but we just got to get better to make sure those two don't happen, things like that don't happen again.
Any information you could give us along those lines, and I think as we've already learned here today, earlier, that it takes there's three things that cause a major problem. That'd be a derailment, and something would happen to puncture the tank itself, and then there has to be some ignition source, and whatever is being carried would ignite.
Absolutely.
We've never had that incident, to my knowledge.
No, that's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Udicek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, Dr. Zaramsky noted that derailments in the state of Pennsylvania are largely caused by human factors or track categories. You've made billions of dollars of investments on track infrastructure and technology. Can you speak to the human investment? Is there a special certification to operate a crude oil train, or are they simply part of your normal operating teams?
Engineers are required to have a federal certification to be a certified locomotive engineer. And they're not distinguished once they have that certification. They are not assigned specifically to a particular type of service. I mean, that falls under collective bargaining agreements. So, you know, we can have an engineer that could be operating a crude oil train one day and a coal train the next day, and, you know, just a general freight train the following day. It's not that we have a special pool of employees that are assigned to crude oil service.
Senator Udicek, I would add that we don't want any of our trains to derail. I mean, crude or automobiles. Obviously, there's potentially greater impact for a flammable derailment, but if we lose a couple of auto racks tip over, our customer's not going to be particularly happy. So there is pretty intensive training, twice a year beyond the certification, twice a year rule training. And I would say that the focus is less on their training, is less on the commodity and more on the territory. So you are trained before you're even allowed to get given full authority of a locomotive. You've got to have operated that territory. And I mean, Pennsylvania is a great example of the different types of terrain, that, you know, urban and rural territory. So really, the focus is less on the commodity and more on making sure these men and women know their territory inside and out, so they can operate all trains safely.
Thank you.
Senator Vogel.
Thank you. Good morning, gentlemen. Both you gentlemen have a huge presence in my district, which includes Beaver County. The rail yards, you guys run a lot of freight through Beaver County every day. And I want to thank you for the good job you do. But just one quick question, just a curiosity. How many gallons or barrels of oil in one car?
30,000?
Yeah,
30,000?
Yeah, it's 27 to 30,000
Barrels?
gallons, depending
Gallons.
on whether it's the Bakken crude versus the heavy Canadian
Okay.
crude.
That's just a curiosity question. I was wondering about that because you see hundreds of cars sitting there in line every day. Just curious how much it was in a car. It's sort of kind of, I guess, unbelievable that you're talking about the pool fire survivability and why you don't go to the higher 800 minutes versus 100 minutes, because so many of these trains we're talking about travel through the suburban areas of Pennsylvania, through Pittsburgh and through Philadelphia and places. And we had that one train derailment there in Pittsburgh not too long ago, where a couple cars burnt and stuff there. And so, I mean, it's just sort of kind of unbelievable that they won't go to the higher limit. Why, what is the reasoning, or why is that something that's they're fighting back on, or what?
PHMSA did not offer any comment on why they decided to hold to the lower standard. It's not something that the rail industry is happy with at all. And we are going to continue to work to try to raise that standard so the survivability in a pool fire, which really goes straight to emergency responders and how they can deal with this situation, we think it's unacceptable.
I agree. Like you said, so many of the trains travel through our Pittsburgh and Philadelphia areas like that, and
Senator, we do. It's so critical to try to reduce risk on all, I mean, at every level. And you think the difference of time, I mean, to have first responders get on scene and, you know, the additional damage that could cause from an explosion.
Right.
If we can get in there and have the time to put it out, that's always a concern when in the instances where our folks have been out is you know, how long do we have before there's an explosion?
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate anything we can do to help you guys try and change that or change somebody's mind. I'd appreciate knowing about it. I think it's a huge issue. As much freight and ethanol and crude that travels through Pennsylvania ought to be a top priority, I would think. So, but thank you both very much for your testimony here today.
Thank you.
Senator Stefano.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, I have a couple quick questions, mainly for my knowledge. I'm trying to understand the difference between a jacketed and non-jacketed tanker car. And what the
Well, it's a thermal blanket. Basically what you have is you have the tank car shell, which under these new standards is going to be 9/16 of an inch. That's the actual tank.
Yes.
Then you have a thermal jacket around the tank, and then you have the jacket that is basically just covering, you know, it's a 3-layer system basically. And so all the cars have jackets. It's the thermal blankets that.
So more than just more of an insulation factor.
Yeah.
Than, okay.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if that there was a difference in dependability or puncture resistance.
Well, there's varying standards on the types of blankets and jackets are on cars, and those really go to the heart of if there is an incident, the time people have to respond to figure out what's going on and what needs to be done to deal with the situation.
Okay. Thank you very much. My second question then deals with the defective rails. I love the technology that you're using. Where do you find your defective rails coming from, wear and tear or manufacture?
I would say more wear and tear, but occasionally there are manufacturing issues as well.
Okay, a little bit of both, because then some of these rails are hundreds of years old, over 100 years old.
Well, we'll actually have a rotating cycle of. I mean, you go into the chief engineer's office and just their schedule of subdivision and how many ties are replaced this year on a rolling 3-year or 5-year cycle,
Okay.
and it's really derived from various risk factors. How much tonnage operates on it? Do you have hazmat running on it? Is there passenger rail? So we really try to look at this from a risk base. But I mean, in most cases on mainline track, if you go 5 years without changing it out, that's probably too long.
Yeah,
Really? So
and curves will
Right.
get more attention because curves will wear quicker than tangent track.
So your rails have a definite service life.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay. That was my biggest question.
I mean, you have to, for Norfolk Southern, and CSX is in the same boat, that our capital expenditure program for 2015 is going to be about $2.4 billion. And the single largest line item on that, in that, is track and bridge maintenance.
Thank you very much.
Senator Bartolotta.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks so much for being here. Just another quick question about the length of time, the survivability between 100 and 800 minutes. Now you were mentioning the jackets, and that's what plays the role in the length of time there is for emergency responders to come. My question is, and there are various weights of different jackets and thicknesses and things like that, and what they're made from. Now, that probably also has to do with the weight of the cars, maybe possibly maneuverability of the trains. How does that affect the wear and tear on the
I think
any of that?
if I understand your question correctly, I don't think that the varying weights play a significant role in terms of how much product can be loaded into that car.
Right.
So, I mean, yeah, it's going to vary a little bit. For example, because of the tank cars that carry the Canadian crude, which is heavier and needs to be heated to be unloaded, that they have basically steam coils in there, which is why the capacity of those cars are only 27,000 gallons versus the 30,000 gallons for the Bakken crude. So the coils are kind of taking up some space.
Okay. So those jackets in the cars are the cost goes to whoever owns the tank car.
Correct.
So I would imagine it would probably cost more to provide a tank that can survive 800 minutes over 100 minutes. So
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good
factor?
assumption. Yeah, I would, but I don't know in the grand scheme of things. I mean, I think a new tank car costs about $150,000. I don't know that I've been told that if you're going to have 100-minute survivability, there's no point in having a thermal jacket at all. That a tank car may survive 100 minutes anyways without it.
Yeah.
But if you have the 800-minute thermal jacket, that obviously is going to cost some money. Now,
Right.
I have no idea how much and how that factors into, the sticker price, I guess.
Right. I'm just wondering why, you were saying it is ridiculous not to choose, the better option, but I was just
Yeah, well, I mean, this goes
determining that
again
might
is
be the case.
both the rail industry and the American Petroleum Institute are we're baffled by the fact that the cars are not being required to have a higher safety standard.
Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. To dovetail on the senator's question, is there someone lobbying against that? If you're pushing for it, or is it just some bureaucrat in the federal government saying, no, I don't think it's needed?
Next question.
Yeah, next question, please.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Gotcha. Thank you for that answer. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your testimony. Very thorough. Normally I hear to schedule times, but this was very interesting and we learned quite a bit, so thank you. And the future panelists, you will get your time in, so don't worry. But thank you very much for this very thorough presentation. Mr. Kendall, Mr. Husband, good to see you, Rudy.
thank you,
Thank
Chairman.
you, Chairman.
Thanks
Appreciate
very
it.
much. Senator Wozniak's still tied up in the meeting. Senator Udicek had to leave for a meeting over at his office, so thank you very much. Next panel will include Mr. Robert Poole, Chief Deputy Director, Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, the Honorable Scott Martin, Lancaster County Commissioner, and not a stranger to our committees where he's come in before and testified on the failure of the 800 megahertz system, and Mr. Randy Gockley, Director of Lancaster County's Emergency Management Agency. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. Gentlemen, you have the floor.
I've stepped out for a meeting.
There you go. Okay. Good morning to both the chairman and the members of the committee. Thank you for really having this this hearing on a very important topic, whether you're talking about rail safety or the importance of pipeline infrastructure. When we talk about the safe movement of energy in this country and what it means, not only here in Pennsylvania, but across our country and around the world, it's a critical topic. So thank you for having us here today. My name is Scott Martin. I'm Vice Chairman of the Lancaster County Board of Commissioners. And joining me today is our County Emergency Management Director, Randall Gockley. Both of us are active members of the Lancaster County Local Emergency Planning Committee, known as the LEPC, which is responsible for planning, training, and response to a hazardous materials release within the county. The authority of the LEPC is provided by state law, Act 165, which continues to be a key piece of response legislation. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to comment on the planning and training efforts we have already taken in preparation for a crude oil unit train incident and to provide ideas and suggestions to further improve efforts statewide. Crude oil unit trains present challenges for emergency responders with the potential for significant public and environmental impact. We've already seen this over the past 2 years with serious incidents in other areas of the nation and Canada. In some cases, this has necessitated both community-wide evacuations as well as sheltering in place orders. It is reported by Norfolk Southern that 10 to 16 trains each carrying in excess of 1 million gallons of flammable crude oil, pass through the county weekly. These trains pass along what is called the Port Road, a 32.5-mile trek following the Susquehanna River through our county. It goes through 10 different municipalities, including the boroughs of Marietta and Columbia, and 8 mostly rural townships as it runs from the Dauphin County line to Maryland. Within a half mile of this railroad, 13,490 citizens live. The Susquehanna River, which is part of Lancaster County, is within several hundred feet of the rail line. This half-mile width area also includes 8 public water intakes, which includes water being utilized by the City of Lancaster, Columbia Borough, and Chester Water Authority. A variety of private water intakes, many that serve agricultural and industrial needs, several parks, islands and trails, osprey and bald eagle nests, 4 schools, 4 daycares, and 3 major hydroelectric dams and generating stations. Also, the Peach Bottom Atomic Power Station in York County could be impacted by a major spill into the river. As you can sense, depending on where an accident involving a spill or a fire were to occur, serious consequences could occur. Our proactive efforts are being made to avoid a major loss of life, the impact of serious environmental disaster, and to minimize considerable energy and utility losses. All areas where the unit trains pass are served by volunteer fire companies, career and volunteer emergency medical services. Some of the communities have their own police departments, while several are served by the Pennsylvania State Police. A well-trained volunteer hazmat response team serves our county. All of the emergency services have limited resources, which would limit the local efforts. We are looking at the reality that any serious incident would quickly escalate into a regional event and require the assistance and resources of both state and federal agencies. Some of the steps that have been taken to date include, on May 19, 2014, the county and the LEPC sponsored a functional simulated rail accident exercise involving a rail incident in Marietta. 82 responders and elected officials participated in this exercise, which was sponsored through a grant from PEMA, TransCare, and Norfolk Southern. In July of 2014, the county's hazmat administrator attended a 3-day class on response to unit train incidents held in Pueblo, Colorado, with all expenses reimbursed and paid by Norfolk Southern. This class was a day and a half of classroom and a day and a half of practical exercises. Considerable time was spent on foam use in case of a fire. The crude oil from the Bakken region has considerably higher flammability compared to other grades of crude oil. The exercise and class were very helpful in preparation for future and further response planning. I would now like to ask Director Gockley to explain our crude oil unit train or CALP plan to you. Randy?
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Eric Bachman, the county hazmat administrator, has developed an in-depth plan for an incident involving a crude oil train. This includes planning for a major fire or spill without a resulting fire. He took the LEPC's standard plan for fixed facilities and modified it to be used at any location within the 32-mile area of the rail line. As a basis for his planning guidance, he utilized the 2012 Emergency Response Guidebook, which identifies a half-mile radius hazard vulnerability zone for wherever the location of the accident would be. Guide number 128 provides the basic information from the Emergency Response Guidebook based on the chemical makeup of the crude oil. These ERGs are provided at no charge to every emergency service in the United States, so that all responders to a crude oil event has access to it. Eric worked with the different municipal emergency management coordinators, fire chiefs, and other emergency officials to research the local impact that an accident would have on the community. The feedback from the local responders and officials was vital to develop a functional and realistic plan. It was extremely time-consuming, but was vitally important in an effort to help assure the safety of the communities. The plan has been distributed on a computer disk to the emergency response agencies within the 10 municipalities so that all emergency services have easy access to it. The county's efforts has become the model plan for the 8-county South Central Task Force. Both the State Department of Environmental Protection, DEP, and Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency, PEMA, has reviewed the plan and provided copies of the plan. Other areas of the Commonwealth, as well as bordering Maryland counties and Maryland state agencies, have asked for copies, and our agency has gladly shared generic copies of the plan to assist other areas. Excuse me. Other efforts that our agency is participating in includes additional planning by the South Central Task Force, especially in the area of firefighting foam. A regional work group meets routinely to assure there are adequate logistical resources of foam and other needed items to mitigate the incident. Standard operating procedures for a large-scale foam incident are being established. Also, we are participating with the state DEP, which hired a consulting firm to assure there is adequate hazardous material absorbent booms and related training in placing the booms for a spill in the Susquehanna River, which is a mile wide at some locations. In my 27-year career, we have not had the need or the resources, for that matter, to completely boom the river from one side to the other. As noted earlier, with the water intakes, it is vitally important to limit the spill of crude oil into a waterway or ground. At this time, I would like to turn it back to Commissioner Martin for our suggestions and recommendations moving forward.
Thank you, Randy. As you can see, we are taking the crude oil unit train threat very seriously within Lancaster County. We are pleased with our preparation efforts to date, but realize that planning continues to be a work in progress. Exercises are very important, and I would suggest that every county where a crude oil train passes have a functional exercise every 2 years specific to that threat. All 3 Lancaster County commissioners participated with the 2014 rail exercise, as well as recent TMI and Peach Bottom exercises. As a participant, I realize the importance of having these exercises to maintain and understand my responsibility as an elected official with public safety. A high level of training must be maintained. All firefighters are required to have annual hazardous materials training, and in most classes, flammable liquids are included. What makes this different is the larger quantity involved. The emergency services are prepared for a small-scale incident, but the amounts involved in a train spill or fire would be quickly overwhelming. There is a need to continue to send responders out to Pueblo, but more realistically, it will be very cost-effective to bring the classroom part of the Colorado school into Pennsylvania so that many could be trained instead of just a few. Ample funding must be provided by Norfolk Southern and other carriers to assure the local responders have the training, planning, and response capabilities required. The state may want to expand Act 165 to include additional grant capabilities and reporting requirements for unit trains. Also, one of the concerns that we've heard from citizens is if there was serious spill or fire, does state law assure that the response and recovery costs faced by local governments, response organizations, impacted businesses, and individual citizens are covered? Some local constituents have asked for assurance that railroads have satisfactory insurance in the aftermath of a catastrophic event. This is an issue that would have to be looked at Commonwealth-wide. Randy and I hope that we have shown you how Lancaster County takes the potential of a crude oil train incident very seriously. We feel that this is a low probability threat. However, if it occurs, it would be a very dangerous and tedious incident. Rail carriers need to assure they are responsive to concerns of the public and safety officials. Over the past 2 years, we have seen several serious events in the nation and need to assure a high level of preparation for all areas of the state where these trains pass. I want to thank you very much to all those companies who work very closely with our first responders, because they do partner with us in many different ways for the safety of our community. And I also want to thank you for your time with this hearing, and gladly turn it over to the next presenter.
Good morning, Chairman Rafferty and Yaw, Senator Bartolotta. I'm Bob Full. I'm the Chief Deputy Director of the Pennsylvania Emergency Management Agency. And with me today is already recognized State Fire Commissioner Solobay is here as well, who is available to answer any questions you may have in regarding to ongoing first responder training programs which address flammable liquid events. We thank you for the opportunity to provide these statements and discuss emergency preparedness and public safety implications for the railway transportation of crude oil across the Commonwealth. On behalf of Governor Wolf and Director Flynn, let me say, as the state agency responsible for emergency preparedness and response, we are well aware of and sensitive to the concerns associated with hazardous materials in our communities. One of PEMA's primary functions is to work with county and local emergency managers to ensure that throughout the Commonwealth there is a state of readiness to respond to any type of emergency or disaster. In emergency management terms, it's an all hazards approach to emergency management. I'd like to take this opportunity to compliment the commissioners of Lancaster as well as Director Glockley and all the leadership that has been demonstrated by the Lancaster County in regards to dealing with not only crude oil, but their entire approach to emergency management. Over the past 25 years, Pima has been recognized as a national leader in helping to prepare our local first responders in the event of an incident involving hazardous materials. With the support of the General Assembly, Pima has developed a statewide network of state-certified hazardous materials teams. And these teams are specially trained and equipped to respond to incidents in the workplace as well as on the highways and rail lines and other modes of transportation. As the former county emergency director of emergency management and the hazardous materials team chief for many years, the statewide commitment to preparedness has had a direct and positive impact on community public safety throughout the Commonwealth. My personal experience in emergency responses to hazardous materials incidents includes serving as the first hazardous materials response chief for the city of Pittsburgh. And during my 13 years in that capacity, I responded to hundreds of chemical spill emergencies within the city and Allegheny County. I am also the former president of the Pennsylvania State Association of Hazardous Materials Technicians. And as the Chief Deputy Director of Pima, I can assure you that Pima has been fully aware of and engaged in the railroad crude transportation matter. Pima was fully engaged in the recent rail incident when a train slid off the tracks in January of 2014 on the Schuylkill Arsenal Bridge while traveling from Chicago to a refinery in South Philadelphia. After that incident, we did an after-action review to assess the matter. Well before the incident in Philadelphia, Pima had been working with CSX Transportation to enter into a memorandum of agreement for their Secure Now program. The agreements will give Pima and has given Pima the information in real time on what's being carried on their trains as well as where their trains are anywhere in the Commonwealth. This will allow Pima to track and monitor the information on those trains and commodities, including the hazardous materials that are being transported throughout Pennsylvania on CSX. Also will allow us at Pima to be able to communicate quickly the train content information to our county emergency management agencies and the 911 centers and the local first responders at the site of any rail emergency. CSX is not the only transporter of hazardous materials, including crude oil and ethanol, through the Commonwealth. And the other major rail transporter of hazardous materials is Norfolk Southern. We've heard from both of them today. As we did with CSX, Pima is currently and always have been in dialogue with Norfolk Southern to discuss the transportation of hazardous materials on their rail lines as well. And they've given us access to their product, which is referred to as Ask Rail. As you know, a major key to the effort to revitalize the Pennsylvania Southeast refineries was the ability to secure supplies of crude oil from the Balkan region in North Dakota and Montana. This crude oil has a lower flash and ignition point than several conventional crude oils. I would just draw the attention of many of us remember the old TV show Beverly Hillbillies. Whenever Jet Clampett was out in the field and he shot the ground and there was bubbling crude came up. That crude is not the crude that is referred to as what we're dealing with the Balkan crude. The Balkan crude is much more volatile in regards to the crude oil terms. In May, the Department of Transportation issued their emergency order requiring shippers to test the product for the Balkan region to ensure that they're properly classed. Again, crude oil comes in many, it's a general name, and it comes in many different concentrations, strengths, and chemical makeup as it's being transported by rail, while also prohibiting the transportation of crude oil in its lowest strength packaging group. In addition, it's our understanding that the rail companies involved in the transport of the Balkan oil have voluntarily decided to lower their speed limits in certain areas and redirect trains around the high-risk areas and to also examine tracks more frequently. Pima receives grant funding from the Department of Transportation, and through that Hazardous Materials Emergency Preparedness Grant Program, this is a program specifically aimed at planning and training for transportation incidents involving hazardous materials. And on February 12th, PEMA received the word that the current grant cycle should be focused on developing emergency plans and dealing with bulk shipments of crude by rail across the Commonwealth. For the last 3 years, PEMA has been providing grant funding to counties and the State Fire Academy for specialized training to firefighters and other emergency service responders regarding the hazards of ethanol, which is also transported in large quantities in unit trains across the Commonwealth, which are dedicated trains for only one product, like, again, petroleum crude. These are typically trains consisting of 100 tank cars, and each one of those tank cars carries approximately 30,000 gallons, which equates to approximately 3 million gallons moving through our rails and through the Commonwealth on a regular basis. In 2012, there were 1,597 individuals that received ethanol fire training coordinated through the State Fire Academy with that new grant monies. And with that, PEMA is making planning and training monies available for crude incidents, again, as a funding priority for now and into the future for our firefighters. And on behalf of the governor, Governor Wolf, and the more than 12 million Pennsylvania we serve, I thank you and the leaders of this committee, both of the committees, for your continued support of PEMA and our partners in public safety across the state. And I would be happy to answer any of your questions at this time.
Thank you, gentlemen. I think you did a very thorough presentation. I do want to take a moment, though, on a personal matter. Gentleman here before us, Commissioner Scott Martin, has decided not to seek re-election as a member of the Board of Commissioners in Lancaster County. I've had the opportunity to work with Scott on a number of issues regarding public safety, his concern for the updated equipment, and to have as a efficient package of resources for first responders is exemplary. Scott has testified before this committee once before on the 800 megahertz system that, 3 or 4 governors have insisted was working, and we all said wasn't working. So I thank Scott for his frankness and sharing his information and facts at that hearing, and I thank him for being here today. Scott, I can only hope with your ingenuity, your drive, and your integrity that you one day look again for public service.
Thank you,
You'll
Senator.
be missed, and I thank you very much for being here again today.
Thank you. Yeah.
Senator Yaw.
Thank you. Mr. Full, one of my questions was what role that you see PEMA playing in this whole scenario, and I think at the end you said planning and training. How do you plan to fulfill the training requirement? I mean, are you going to have centralized locations? You going out in the field? Just briefly, what's in your mind?
Senator,
You can't throw the commissioner under the bus.
I certainly don't want to, and I don't want to step on the commissioner's toes because they're awful big toes. And we have the highest regard for the capabilities that our State Fire Academy has done and continues to do over the many years. We have access to grant funding that is made available to us through different means, both the Department of Transportation, hazardous materials monies that are made available to us through Act 165, as well as Department of Homeland Security monies as well. And we can work with the local counties, their emergency management agencies, to ensure that they have some of the monies necessary to conduct, as the commissioner here has mentioned, about exercising, tabletop exercises, and eventually have a full-scale exercise. That money can be made available to them, and there's a regular process in place that the counties can apply for those monies. They're not adequate enough to do all the training, so without question there needs to be additional funding is made available to energize those funding sources to get the sheer volumes of first responders that we need to have this specialized training. But it's a good start. Actually, this meeting is a great start. We're talking about it. The local counties are talking about it. The local municipalities are talking about it. The regions are talking about it as well. What we can do at PEMA also is we can bring the parties together. You know, we have the diversity of so many of our municipalities in 67 counties. The leadership that Lancaster here has demonstrated here is not the same in many of the counties throughout the Commonwealth. And where we sit here at PEMA, it is our job to ensure that there's a standard level of care or capability across the Commonwealth. We hope to utilize the experiences and best practices of like Lancaster and some of our larger counties that have been working on this for a period of time to share it across the entire county enterprise out there to ensure that we have a standard level service that we can guarantee. That they're the emergency responders that have the necessary training that when they first arrive on the scene, what their decision-making process should be, what they should be looking for. And then from there, and making those critical decisions in those first 5-10 minutes will go a long way and generally will lead to the success or failure of handling those things. And critical to these is protecting the public and property and the environment, and it's a very rapid decision-making process. One of the things we're going to be doing here within the next couple of weeks, Senator, is we've called for a Balkan Summit as part of one of our 2-day training programs where we're bringing all of our 67 county emergency management directors and our 69 911 directors together in one place here in Harrisburg, actually. We are literally going to marry them up with the railroad, a number of the people that have testified here today, and have an open discussion about, again, what everybody is doing and what are the necessary needs out there to have perhaps a standardized planning templates to provide help to those counties and those local municipalities that perhaps don't have the resources to do that, but also then identify the resources necessary to be able to respond to these things in an effective manner, as well as then to work on a plan to get those people that need the training the closest to the tracks and in those sensitive areas, prioritize those needs and then begin to move forward. This issue with dealing with crude oil falls in line with exactly how the emergency services and emergency management community has dealt with the Marcellus and the unconventional well industry as well. And Senator, in your area up there, your emergency service has done a phenomenal job with your leadership up there in dealing with Marcellus, and they stand as leaders up there in Lake Coming and in the northern tier in doing that. That all came about, and it was far advanced of what the emergency services and a lot of folks were able to do because that industry was growing so quickly. I know right now with the crude, again, this has moved very quickly, but I am also encouraged the fact that the local emergency services folks, the counties and so forth, have been doing an admirable job in trying to catch up to it as well. And we will get there as good as we have gotten so far with the Marcellus industry with crude. But at the same time is when these things just show up, it does take a period of time to get all of our emergency responders and so forth up to speed on the things that they need to do to protect their public.
Thank you very much for your response. I'd just like to make a comment to Commissioner Martin, and I give you great credit for the comment that you made about what we're dealing with the crude by rail is a low probability threat, but a very high risk impact if there is a problem. And I think that that's part of that's the issue we wrestle with. It's a low probability of anything happening, but if it does happen, it could be very serious. So
right. And we also live downwind of 2 nuclear power plants. And obviously, I would say the same thing about that. But as you all can appreciate, our job as a first responder community is to be prepared and to be well trained to respond when what's hopefully an unlikely event that's something that occurs. And I kind of liken it, Senator, to when let's say when the shale industry started to boom here. Before, you used to have to go get job training. You'd have to go to a place like Texas Tech to get it.
Yes.
Now you can get it at places like Lackawanna Community College here. Get it, your hands-on training. This, as a ripple effect in the energy movement industry, something we're not used to in this quantity and size, though it has come upon us quickly. We do have the people who are willing to learn on the local level, who are partnering with the industries. I think if there's a more streamlining of resources, we certainly have the training facilities throughout the Commonwealth in order to hold these exercises, whether it's at State Fire Academy, the Lancaster County Public Safety Training Center, which is used by many counties, not only in Pennsylvania, but across the state. I think more streamlining those resources and making sure that we don't have to keep sending people to Pueblo, Colorado, given how busy it is in Pennsylvania with the movement of energy in this industry. I think we can do a lot more and have a standard. Just like with Peach Bottom and TMI, we have to do it every other year with each of those facilities. Randy mentioned, and I think I mentioned in my report, maybe 2 years that you do have train derailment exercises. It not only benefits in terms of this specific topic and type of derailment, but any type of derailment. And I think it benefits all of us when our first responders have that proper training.
Well, I agree with you. I will have to put in a personal plug, though, since you indicated Lackawanna College, which is absolutely true. It's a great place to get training. Another place in Pennsylvania is Pennsylvania College of Technology.
Yes.
So,
yes, absolutely.
Since that's in my district also.
And Stevens Trade, which is in Lancaster County. So we got all our plugs in.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator
Bartolotta.
Thank you. Thanks so much for all of your incredible information. And Mr. Full, this question would be for you. Training is absolutely vital. You're so correct in that, in the first responding. And the list of all of the training that you expressed, that's really remarkable. Does any of that training involve volunteer firefighters? Because throughout my entire district, we rely very, very heavily on our volunteers, our volunteer fire departments. And in Pennsylvania, as of May of just this year, Pennsylvania doesn't require any training for our volunteer firefighters. They can step right on a truck and head to a fire, versus, say, West Virginia, that requires 120 hours of training before any firefighter sets foot on a truck. So for our volunteer fire departments, of which we rely heavily in our rural areas in particular, where these cars do go through on a regular basis, my worry is, will there be any training whatsoever for volunteer firefighters?
Senator, we would hope that all the training be available to all emergency responders. And really, we don't differentiate, quite frankly, between volunteer firefighters and paid firefighters and all those kinds of things. To us, we look at it through the lens of firefighting is firefighting, and we don't look at whether or not you're paid for it or you're a volunteer. It's just as dangerous, and you have the call to duty and so forth as one or the other. One is just being paid to do it as the other. But also with the volunteers, we are sensitive also, and we all need to be sensitive to the availability of their time. And so as the commissioners mentioned here, is we know that they all can't go to the Lewistown training facility, that there are more localized and regionalized training facilities out there that can be utilized in regards to some of the more specialized training. But quite frankly, it comes down to even a more basic level. Director Glockley showed the book, and I'll show it to you here as well. And he and I come up through the same routes and so forth. This book is made available to every emergency services organization in the Commonwealth, and there's to be one in every police car, every fire truck, every ambulance throughout the Commonwealth. If you look in here and you have a Vulcan crude oil train or a crude oil train, and it has a red placard on there, and it says 1267, which is the number, you can look up in your book here right now and get a good start of dealing with and how to deal with that particular situation. With that said, that basic level of training is something that also should be done not just for this particular issue we're talking about today, but the hazardous materials are so prominent in our today's world that they're in everything, and all the chemicals that are carried out there. Quite frankly, the volumes that are carried on these trains are concerning without question. But I don't want to be an alarmist, but I'll just quite frankly tell you that there are far more dangerous products that are being carried out there in our communities on all kinds of different modes of transportation, but at the same time, generally, they're all transported safely. But this book will give our emergency responders that edge in getting started. Also, you mentioned about the training in regards to no standard for fire training or requirement compared to other states. There is a little federal law that says that actually firefighters do have to have at least a couple hours of hazardous materials response training. And it's a federal law. And technically, it falls in line. So any fire department that is in operation that has a responsible chief or has responsible officers should be addressing this book and the basic hazardous materials awareness and operations training program, and it'll give them the initial edge. To take it to the next level, we will need additional dollars and leveraging, again, additional support from the railroad industry and those that are made available to us through our local emergency planning committees, as well as some of the grants that we can bring to the table, and both from the state, utilizing federal grants, both Department of Transportation, Homeland Security training. I think it is a process that we can get at least the key folks across the Commonwealth in those key areas. We'll never get them all trained, but we need to ensure that we can get somebody there as quick as possible, within minutes hopefully, that have the specialized training to advise the incident commanders of whether or not to take that step, to attack that situation and to deal with that situation, or perhaps take a look at it and say, listen, the biggest risk we have here right now is us, the firefighters. Maybe we just need to back away and let this thing burn. But if it's beside a school, and if it's in the middle of downtown Pennsylvania town or something like that, that may change the game as well. So we focus in on those rail lines or locations, those people that are, those tracks are closest to our people, but also we work our way back. But at the same time, it'll be a systematic approach, but it will take some time. But the core basic awareness and operations training is readily available across the Commonwealth in many domains right now, and we would highly recommend that if this is the issue that brings them to the table, so be it. Get to training. It'll save your life and it'll save your community's survivability in dealing with a hazardous materials incident.
Thank you. Did you?
Senator, I just want to add, and I can just speak for Lancaster County, but the volunteer firefighter community is heavily involved in all the trainings. If you ever have an opportunity to see a train derailment exercise, it is something to be seen, the coordination that goes not only to running it, but needs to be done during the actual exercise. They're side by side with law enforcement, with your EMS personnel, with PEMA and FEMA. Probably more importantly, Randy, not only serving in his capacity as the Director of Emergency Management, he's also been a longtime fire chief in Ephrata, Pennsylvania for Lincoln Fire Company. I thought maybe he might talk about the training that his volunteers participate in.
Just to stress, Senator, although training is not mandated in the state of Pennsylvania, many of the volunteers, as well as career firefighters, voluntarily take the necessary training. I think many of the fire companies are doing an excellent job of weaning those people away that just want to pay $1 to join the fire company and become a firefighter. Those days are certainly over as much as possible. So I think on down the road, a mandatory training is going to be something that happens in the state of Pennsylvania, but we want to stress that there is ample training opportunities out there, and many of our firefighters are very well trained. Also, to the senator's comment when the rail industry was testifying about that it would take several hours until they would get their resources there, that is very much correct information, and that's where our emergency services have to be prepared to respond and handle that from the time the incident starts until those resources are brought forth by the rail industry 3 to 4 hours down the road. That is the key emergency window that we're dealing with until that additional support and logistics help.
Great. Thank you.
I don't want to prolong this, but you're absolutely right. This is, with rail transportation, it's a bit different than it is with, Commissioner Martin, what you said about the gas industry, because what we learned and first responders learned in our area where the gas industry is, a major industry, is that first responders there are trained probably stay away and do perimeter. because a fire, when there's a gas fire, you know where the gas is because of the fire burning. If you put it out, sometimes that's the worst thing to do because then you don't know where the gas is. So it was kind of the training that they've developed is like try to provide perimeter security, which is entirely different than the situation which you're talking about, where it may take hours. Because in a well fire, the drilling personnel are on site right away. But in a rail situation, it could take several hours till somebody gets there from the company. So it is a little bit different situation, which just goes to emphasize the need for training. So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Much appreciated. And good
Thank you
job.
very much.
Thank you,
Scott,
Senator.
best wishes to you.
It's good seeing you all.
Thank you very much,
Thank you very
Senator.
much. Also, for the record, there's some written testimony for safe transportation of crude oil and other energy products in the Sierra Club of Chester County. The written testimony has been so omitted. You'll be happy to know that both Senator Yaw and I's chairs have waived our closing remarks. So we gave some time. And the information today will be on our websites as well, so you can read through those, or any of the public seeing the TV presentation could read through those as well. Today we have Energy Perspectives Panel, Ms. Elizabeth Tressiter, Policy Advisor, American Petroleum Institute, and Mr. Philip Rinaldi, Chief Executive Officer, Philadelphia Energy Solutions. We thank you for your patience, but today's hearing's been very informative, so I did allow us to run over a little bit on time, but you'll have your time. Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Great. Good morning, Chairman Rafferty, Chairman Yaw, and Senator Bartoletta. My name is Beth Tressiter, and I'm a Policy Advisor at the American Petroleum Institute. API has more than 625 member companies and represents all sectors of America's oil and natural gas industry. Our industry supports 9.8 million American jobs and 8% of the U.S. economy. It also provides most of the energy we need to power our economy and our way of life. Today, I'd like to speak of the midstream segment of the industry, the portion of the industry responsible for safely and efficiently transporting millions of barrels of oil and billions of cubic feet of natural gas every day from the oil and gas fields across the country to our refineries and processing plants by means of pipelines, vessels, and rail lines. Due to their ingenuity and engineering abilities in overcoming the bottlenecks in the existing infrastructure system, the U.S. is now firmly established as a global energy superpower. More specifically, EIA data shows that tight oil production went from less than 500,000 barrels per day in 2007 to 3.9 million barrels per day in 2014. That's an 8-fold increase in only 7 years. And with that increase in production came employment for hundreds of thousands of people. IHS has estimated that in 2012, over 800,000 people owed their job to unconventional oil activity. This is production from places such as the Niobrara in Colorado, the Permian and Eagle Ford in Texas, and the Bakken in North Dakota. Much of the rapid rise in production comes from the regions of the country without a history of oil production, and they therefore have limited infrastructure development, such as pipelines, to move and deliver crude oil. As a result, the industry has turned to railroads to move this new production to refining centers on the coasts that were not connected to the production fields. According to EIA, almost 70% of Bakken production now moves by rail. For East Coast refiners, domestic and Canadian production delivered by rail has constituted a new and competitive alternative to imported oil from overseas. EIA data shows that in January of 2012, crude deliveries by rail constituted less than 5% of East Coast refiner receipts of crude oil. In January 2014, crude deliveries by rail had risen to account for 40% of all East Coast refinery crude oil receipts. This February, receipts of crude oil by rail accounted for more than half of the crude oil supply to East Coast refineries. This was made possible by the expansion of crude by rail loading terminals at the production site, as well as offloading terminals at or near refineries. A few years ago, U.S. rail loading capacity for crude oil was almost entirely for manifest trains, which are trains carrying a small number of tank cars with crude oil. Now, there are more than 30 loading terminals throughout the United States that can accommodate unit trains, which are trains consisting of 80 to 120 rail cars carrying exclusively crude oil. On the East Coast alone, there are now 10 terminals that can unload crude oil unit trains. As these facilities have been built, some of the crude oil that was previously transferred to vessels in Albany before moving on to refineries in the New York Harbor and the Philadelphia area, is now being moved directly by rail closer to its ultimate destination. The growth in production that provided the impetus to expand this infrastructure continues. In March, the latest month for which EIA has data, total oil production was at 9.5 million barrels per day, a level not seen in the U.S. since the 1970s. Moreover, EIA's annual energy outlook forecast, which was just released in April, shows U.S. crude production continuing to grow over the next several years. This growth in production, coupled with the growing infrastructure in the Northeast and the growing share of refinery crude receipts arriving via rail, suggests that crude by rail will continue to be a critical part of the Northeast's robust energy future. All of this is quite a change from where things stood just a few years ago. In 2010, reliance on high-cost crude oil from abroad had forced several East Coast refineries to close or become idle as they were put up for sale. In 2012, it took 2 last-ditch sales to prevent 40% of U.S. East Coast refining capacity from being shut down. The jobs and tax revenue that East Coast refineries provide should not be taken for granted, nor should the role rail plays in the economic viability of these refineries. With regard to rail safety, API believes that a comprehensive approach that addresses prevention, mitigation, and response will yield the most progress in achieving our ultimate goal of zero incidents. First and foremost, accident investigations consistently show that more needs to be done to prevent trains from derailing by enhancing the inspection of maintenance of train tracks, axles, and other railroad equipment. With regard to mitigation, API supports upgrade to the tank car fleets and wants them completed as soon as realistically possible. Last but not least, to strengthen emergency response capabilities, we worked with the railroads to create a new educational course to complement the training of first responders. According to the Association of American Railroads, North America's rail network moves 99.997% of hazardous material shipments to their destination without incident. In the oil and natural gas industry, our goal for safety is always zero. Eliminating the last elements of risk and getting to zero incidents requires a thoughtful, comprehensive, and data-driven safety approach. Elements of a comprehensive approach include doing more to prevent train derailments, upgrading the tank car fleet, and giving first responders the knowledge and tools they need. Over the past 6 years, we have seen increasing U.S. oil and natural gas production drive economic growth and global energy security. We now need policy decisions to secure this path for the decades ahead. This hearing is a constructive step forward, and I thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak with you today. I look forward to any questions you may have.
Senator Rafferty, Senator Yaw, thank you for inviting me to discuss the benefits and economic impacts of the transportation of crude oil by rail through the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It is my intention to read these short prepared remarks into the record and then to be available to answer questions or provide elaboration as the Joint Committee might require. My name is Philip Rinaldi. I am the Chairman, Chief Executive Officer of Philadelphia Energy Solutions, a company organized to acquire, modify, and operate the Philadelphia oil refining assets of what was then Sunoco's Philadelphia-based oil refining business. PES is a business owned by certain management founders, partnered with the Carlyle Group private equity firm and Energy Transfer Partners, the successor in interest to Sunoco. I also have the privilege of chairing the Greater Philadelphia Energy Action Team, a regional coalition dedicated to greatly expanding the market for Marcellus gas by creating a natural gas-based energy hub in Philadelphia that will stimulate a rebirth of manufacturing in the region. On September 8, 2012, PES closed the acquisition of the Point Breeze and Girard Point refineries, sited on the 1,400-acre oil refining complex that spans the Schuylkill River between the airport and Center City. PES has now been in business for more than 2.5 years. I'm making this point because those two refineries were literally weeks away from being permanently closed, with the loss of nearly 900 great union and professional jobs and the jobs of approximately 300 building trades contractors that worked at the complex day in and day out. We not only saved those jobs, but we've increased the PES workforce to approximately 1,240 full-time employees, and we continue to employ about 300 contractors on a daily basis, bringing our effective standing employment to over 1,500 people. We're the single largest oil refining complex on the eastern seaboard of North America. We have materially improved the complex's operating envelope we're the single largest consumer of Bakken crude oil, consuming upwards of 20% of the total production of North Dakota. And in a matter of weeks from now, Philadelphia Energy Solutions expects to become publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. That amazing economic vitality is fully due to the advent of moving crude oil to Philadelphia by rail. When my partners and I were first assessing the viability of Sunoco's Philadelphia-based refining business, we were able to identify focused capital investments that would produce quick and sustaining financial results. And we were able to identify two key business model changes that would make all the difference in the world. Since we've acquired these assets, PES has invested approximately $500 million of capital, making the business more reliable, more efficient, more profitable, and more sustainable. We've converted the business from one that was inefficiently operated, as it was used predominantly to support the Sunoco retail brand, to a high-volume, highly efficient merchant refiner modality. And most importantly, we have materially improved refining margins by cost-effectively assessing the burgeoning supply of mid-continent crude oil driven by the shale revolution, especially crude produced in the Bakken Formation in North Dakota. PES built from scratch what we believe to be the largest, fastest, and most cost-effective crude by rail unloading system in the country. We bring in well over 200,000 barrels of Bakken crude oil every day from North Dakota directly to our Philadelphia refining complex. Without this advantaged crude supply, PES would have never come to fruition and would be at grave risk of obsolescence. One cannot separate the economic advantages that crude by rail brings to Pennsylvania without the greater connection of what does PES and the rest of the regional refining activity bring to the economy overall. We began our investigation into the viability of the refining business that was so troubling to Sunoco in 2011. You might recall that at that time, the then Sunoco CEO frequently and publicly would say, these refiners are losing $1 million a day, and they've done so every day for the last 3 years, and we intend to close them down, bulldoze the site, and build condominiums. To assess what the regional consequences would be of such closure, Dr. William Latham and Dr. Kenneth Lewis at the Center for Applied Business and Economic Research at the Alfred Lerner College of Business and Economics at the University of Delaware prepared an evaluation of the regional economic impact that the Point Breeze and Girard Point refineries had. They concluded that these two refineries had a direct economic impact of $9 billion per year, supporting 10,500 jobs in the region, generating $900 million per year of salaries and wages. Scaling those numbers up to today to reflect our much higher level of operations, of throughput and employment, I believe that those job figures would scale up to something more like $12 billion per year of direct impact today, with approximately 15,000 jobs sustained in the region, generating payroll in excess of $1.5 billion a year. And keep in mind that this reflects the impact only of Philadelphia Energy Solutions. It doesn't include Delta Airlines Monroe Energy Refinery in Marcus Hook, which is about 60% of the size of PES. So one would reasonably expect proportional impact from their operation. Without the benefits that crude by rail brings, PES and Monroe would be in jeopardy of closing, and the region would stand to lose an aggregate in the range of $15 to $20 billion of direct economic impact, and the loss of approximately 24,000 great, high-paying regional jobs, dropping nearly $2.5 billion per year of wage and salary income. And there's more. eConsult Solutions has estimated that the regional reinvigoration of the oil refining sector in Pennsylvania, driven by the crude by rail revolution, has resulted in approximately $1.2 billion of new capital spending in the sector during the past 2.5 years alone. That high level of capital investment not only supported thousands of construction jobs, but the betterments that the projects bring will continue to support strong manufacturing jobs going forward in the future. We dodged a bullet. Contemporaneous with the University of Delaware report, the Department of Energy became nervous, facing what seemed to be a groundswell concept that East Coast refineries could be closed without consequence, that oil refining was unnecessary on the U.S. East Coast because other refineries across the country and around the world would take up the slack and supply the market with the fuels it needed. The DOE studied that proposition and concluded that such a mode of market supply would raise prices dramatically on the East Coast, further hurting the region's ability to compete in economic markets. And they concluded that it would be a national energy security nightmare to lose self-help capability. Outside supply might work under calm conditions, but not if there was a disturbance like a war or a natural disaster or political action. They urged the White House to intercede, which helped galvanize the political will that allowed PES to form and move forward. And in what could only be described as incredibly good fortune, a mere 7 weeks after PES acquired the business, Superstorm Sandy rattled through New Jersey and New York, taking out a great deal of regional refining capacity and the ability of the region to receive products by transcontinental pipeline or by sea. During the month following the storm, PES was supplying about 50% of all the fuel in the region, and the DOE was in nearly daily contact, working with us to allow production increases. Imagine what the situation would have been like had the Point Breeze and Girard Point refineries not been operating. It's tempting to borrow the MasterCard line. Having refining capability was priceless. At the beginning of my testimony this morning, I alluded to my role as chair of the coalition that is driving what has become known as the Energy Hub. What is an Energy Hub? Why does it matter, and what on earth does it have to do with crude by rail? The natural gas reserves in Marcellus are now measured in centuries, not years. It's a good thing to have so much resource. On the other hand, that ultra-long reserve life is really a reflection of the present market for the gas being saturated. But if new uses could be developed for the gas, new consumers, production, and the surrounding economic activity in the Marcellus could expand dramatically. We can wait for new factories to be built in the Gulf Coast Petrochemical Center and ship Pennsylvania gas to serve them, or we could cause that gas to become widely available in Philadelphia, a place with fantastic industrial infrastructure and proximity to markets, a place where new manufacturing can root and grow. I was not invited here today to testify about all the benefits that would inure to an energy hub, but rather to say that it can happen if and only if there's an already thriving oil refining activity to anchor the commercial exploitation of the resource. And that happens as a direct consequence of crude by rail. What kind of plants could be built? Power cogeneration, small-scale regional use LNG and CNG plants, hydrogen plants, ammonia, urea ammonium nitrate plants, methanol plants, and many more. What would be the economic impact? I can't say for certain, but plants like these cost plus or minus $1 billion each to build. Imagine the economic power that throws off. I hope that I was able to shine some light on the enormous positive impact that crude by rail brings to Pennsylvania. There is much more detail that could be discussed and even more related topics, but I think that I'll conclude my prepared remarks now. I appreciate the opportunity to have been heard and will look forward to answering any questions my testimony might have stimulated.
Thank you very much. Senator Young.
Just a comment, Mr. Rinaldi, I agree with you, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Your comments are great. I think they're right on, both with respect to the crude oil and natural gas. They all fit together. And it's a great benefit, I think, to Philadelphia. And Mr. Tressler, just a comment from your testimony, which is amazing to me, that only 3 years ago, 5% of the crude oil that came by rail, and now we're talking about 52% in 3 years. That's a tenfold increase in a 3-year time period. That's an amazing fact, I think, that I'm very happy to learn something like that today.
Yeah, it's been a huge increase, and it's been a huge boon to the East Coast refineries. Absolutely.
I'd like to thank both of you for your testimony. I think it's right on. Thank you.
I'll echo my colleagues' comments, and I think this is the cusp for the city of Philadelphia and the Southeast region to become an energy hub. And I know Representative Keller has felt the same and wants to see the Port of Philadelphia play a more integral part. I've heard people say this could become the second Houston. How do you feel on a comment such as that, Mr. Rinaldi?
I believe it can be. It's for me, it's a personal privilege. You work a career, and then to find a moment in time that is transformative. And this is a transformative moment for Philadelphia and for Pennsylvania. It can compete. The industrial infrastructure in Philadelphia, incredible. The Delaware River, the Schuylkill River, you have these fabulous railroads, you have decent highways, you have a workforce that has a history of manufacturing, you have available kind of brownfield sites to begin that exploitation, and you've got this great access to the markets. And all of a sudden, you have something that's available that hasn't been heretofore available, and that's energy that has a cost advantage to it. And it's that energy which really drives that whole thing. So I think there's absolutely no doubt that there could be, in a very good way, another Houston.
I appreciate your optimistic attitude and outlook, and I know that there are a number of us who share the same thoughts that you do in Philadelphia's part now with Marcellus, with crude oil, and being a real energy hub and creating more and more jobs for the city of Philadelphia. So, and the southeast region. I don't mean just the city, because I got people who go in and work as well from my area. So, Representative Keller has been a real champion on that as well. So I want to recommend him and recognize him on that. No further questions. Thank you very much. I want to thank the PUC for hosting us here today. We hope you found this a very informative hearing. I know Senator Yaw and I will get a chance to go through all the testimony and look at possible legislation that will make recommendations to our colleagues in the Senate and the House. So thank you very much. This joint hearing is recessed to the call of the chairs.